beneath the waves, beneath the deserts, beneath the myths we're not the first. Across every continent lie ruins too ancient, too complex, and too perfectly aligned to explain who built them, when, and why did they all vanish beneath floods, fire, and silence. From Atlantis to Agartha, this is not a history lesson. This is a descent into the forbidden chapters of our past. One by one, we'll unearth the civilizations that time tried to erase and ask the question no one dares. What if the flood didn't end the world? It reset it. Before we dive deeper, make sure you're subscribed. This rabbit hole goes way down, and you won't want to miss what's next. And while you're here, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because if there's one thing these ancient civilizations taught you, it's that timing is everything. Atlantis. It begins, as it always does, with a flash of water and a whisper of memory. A name older than cities, older than scripture. Atlantis. The name rolls like thunder over the centuries, etched into marble, inked into parchment, clickbaited into oblivion. But before it became a punchline or a tourist trap, Atlantis was terror. Atlantis was awe. Atlantis was truth, or at least, a truth so ancient it got lost in translation. Plato started it. Timaeus and Critias, those two dialogues nobody really reads unless they're hunting legends, told of a mighty island beyond the Pillars of Heracles. A land richer than dreams, governed by kings descended from gods, and armed with a navy vast enough to black out the sea. They built temples from orichalcum, hunted in vast irrigation-fed meadows, and wielded technology that, if you squint hard enough, sounds like science fiction. Earthquakes, floods. In a single day and night of misfortune, Ogon, swallowed by the ocean like a bedtime story whispered by Poseidon himself. Now here's the trick. Plato swore he wasn't making it up. He said the tale came from Solon, the famed Athenian lawgiver, who picked it up during a trip to Egypt. The Egyptian priests, surrounded by scrolls older than Greek civilization itself, told him about a war between Athens and Atlantis, 9,000 years before his time. That's 12,000 years ago for us. Right around the end of the Younger Dryas, when the ice melted, when the sea rose, when something big happened. Now, let's pause. Not for drama, though, we're flush with that, but to ask, what's more suspicious? That Plato was lying? Or that he was telling the truth, and we've spent the last 2,300 years laughing at the idea because it's just too massive to believe? See, the thing about Atlantis is that it sits at the crossroads of too many inconvenient truths. Start pulling the thread, and you find yourself unraveling more than myth. Suddenly, you're staring at geological evidence of sudden sea level rise. You're looking at submerged ruins off the coast of Cuba. You're comparing the concentric ring city of Plato's tale to satellite imagery of Mauritania's Eye of the Sahara, also known as the Rishat structure. Yeah, that eye. That perfect, circular formation in the Western Sahara, the one nobody can explain. Washed-out geological rings, once thought volcanic, but suspiciously aligned with Plato's dimensions of Atlantis, in a desert that was once fertile, once fed by rivers. Where elephant bones, those sacred animals of Atlantis, have been found in abundance. Coincidence? Or ancient memory? It gets messier. The story of a sunken kingdom isn't unique. Almost every culture has a flood myth, a submerged city, a vanished people. From the Sumerian Eridu to the Indian Dwarka. From Celtic Wise to the Doggerland lost under the North Sea. The oceans are graveyards, and we, land-dwelling creatures with the attention span of squirrels, are the amnesiac descendants of survivors. But here's what really breaks the logic barrier: the tech. Plato describes something suspiciously modern. Irrigation systems so advanced they sound engineered, buildings of glass-like metals. A navy so vast it rivals post-industrial empires, the kind of thing that shouldn't exist in 9600 BCE, unless we're wrong about everything. Unless history isn't linear, it's cyclical. And if that's true, if civilizations rise, fall, and rise again, then Atlantis isn't a fable. It's a warning, one written in stone, and water, and fire. The conspiracy theorists, the mystics, the geologists, with too much wine, they've all tried to claim it. But Atlantis doesn't belong to any of them. Atlantis belongs to the deep. It belongs to the black silence beneath the waves, to the ancient pulse of something that lived and died, and maybe just maybe is waiting to be found again. And maybe that's the real reason we laugh it off, not because it's ridiculous, but because it's uncomfortable, because we're standing on the bones of giants and pretending we're the pinnacle. Atlantis is the itch we can't scratch, the memory we've buried under skyscrapers and satellites, a ghost in the global subconscious. But Atlantis didn't just vanish, it infected. The idea spread like spores in the archaeological subconscious. It's the blueprint, the seed crystal, the ultimate origin story of every lost civilization trope. And maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe Atlantis was real, and more importantly, maybe it wasn't alone. Let's talk materials. Orichalcum, a mysterious metal shining like fire, described as second only to gold in value. Plato mentioned it casually as if it were common knowledge. But here's the catch. We don't have any. Not in our museums, not in our dig sites. It simply doesn't exist. Except it does. Sort of. In 2015, marine archaeologists recovered ingots from a 2600-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. Their composition? A curious blend of copper, zinc, and trace elements. Very close to what ancient texts described. Could it be the last echo of a lost technology? And then there's the architecture. Megaliths underwater. Structures that shouldn't exist, unless someone was building them when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower. Like the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a linear formation of rectangular stones, dismissed as natural by mainstream geology, but suspiciously organized for a random coincidence. Or the underwater formations off the coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island, massive terraces and pillars carved into stone, their edges too precise, too sharp. Critics call it pareidolia, seeing patterns in chaos. Believers call it proof. Of what? That we're not the first ones here, not the first engineers. And don't even get us started on maps. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, allegedly based on even older sources, shows Antarctica without ice. A feat, modern cartography, only managed with satellite imaging. So where did that information come from? Who mapped the world when it was still wild? Maybe the better question is, who had the time? Civilization, as we define it, isn't supposed to stretch back that far. Agriculture, at 10,000 BCE, writing around 3,200 BCE. Cities not long after. But Plato's Atlantis shatters that timeline. It suggests a culture capable of political organization, engineering, art, metallurgy, and oceanic warfare over 12,000 years ago. There's a term for that, anachronistic capability. And Atlantis has it in spades. Now let's imagine just for a second that Plato's tale isn't fiction, that some memory of a fallen civilization persisted, carried by survivors or passed down in priestly secrecy. That the story was old even to the Egyptians who told it to Solon. What if we're looking at the fossil record of humanity's first try? Not just a lost city, but a lost world. Of course, that brings us to the uncomfortable question, what ended it? Plato blames divine punishment, corruption, hubris, a culture that grew too powerful, too decadent, and was wiped clean. Sound familiar? It should. It's the oldest trope in the human psyche. Build, fall, repeat. Our myths are full of it. The flood, Babel, Ragnarok, We've been warning ourselves for millennia. And science, that most sober of disciplines, is starting to catch up. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a controversial idea, suggesting a comet or meteor impact triggered sudden climate change around 12,800 years ago, offers a chillingly plausible Atlantis killer: fires, floods, starvation, civilization collapse, in a blink. Atlantis, then, is more than a story. It's a mirror, held up to our fragile modernity, a whisper from the past, telling us we've been here before, that we built towers, that we sailed oceans, that we thought ourselves untouchable, and the sea came anyway. But Atlantis didn't disappear into silence. It echoes, in language, in myth, in strange ruins and stranger maps, in the uneasy feeling we get staring out at the ocean and wondering what's really down there. Because the scariest part about Atlantis isn't that it might be real. It's that it might be normal. And if Atlantis was just one chapter, then the next one is even stranger. Farther east, deeper still, into the waters where the sun sets on forgotten continents and the myths don't just survive, they multiply. Lemuria, Mu, whatever name you give it, it's a place that shouldn't exist. But somehow, it always does. Lemuria, Mu. Lemuria is the civilization that slipped through science's fingers. It started, as so many myths do, with a very serious man, in a very serious hat, trying to solve a problem that didn't quite exist. In 1864, zoologist Philip Sclater looked at a map and scratched his head. Lemurs. Madagascar had lemurs. India had lemur fossils, but nowhere in between. Not in Arabia, not in Africa, not in the endless nothingness of the Indian Ocean. Just an evolutionary leap across 1,000 miles of salt water. So Sclater did what any Victorian man of science would do. He made something up and called it a theory. He proposed a sunken landmass, a lost continent stretching from Madagascar to India where these little tree-hopping furballs once roamed, a bridge between worlds, a cradle of life that fell into the sea. And he named it Lemuria, after the lemurs. It was, by all accounts, a solid scientific hypothesis, for about 5 minutes. Because then Darwin happened, and plate tectonics, and continental drift, and suddenly, the idea of sunken continents got demoted to the myth bin, along with phlogiston and 4 humors. Lemuria was tossed aside, a quaint little footnote in the messy adolescence of geology. But something strange happened. Lemuria didn't die. It mutated. By the early 20th century, Lemuria had evolved from a lemur highway into something far more potent and far more unexplainable. Theosophists like Helena Blavatsky seized the idea and injected it with spiritual steroids. Lemuria, they claimed, was no mere land bridge. It was a civilization, an ancient one, older than Atlantis, home to tall, telepathic beings with advanced knowledge and no need for spoken language. A place where humans hadn't yet solidified into fleshware. We shimmered like fog, half ether, half thought. The first ones, the originals. They said Lemuria stretched from Madagascar to Easter Island, that it rose and fell before we ever picked up a chisel, that it birthed not just culture, but consciousness. Crazy? Sure. But here's the uncomfortable part. We've never quite disproven it. Because buried in this wild esoteric tapestry are threads that tug at the corners of real history. Strange stone ruins on forgotten islands. Oral histories passed down by Polynesian navigators. Giant statues with blank eyes staring at nothing, like the moai of Easter Island linked not to the nearby past, but to something deeper, something older, something Lemurian. Let's talk about the Pacific. It's the largest ocean on Earth. So large, in fact, that we've only explored about 10% of its seafloor. That leaves 90% millions of square miles where anything could be hiding. including a lost continent, or several. Take Zealandia, a real, actual submerged continent, the size of India, hiding beneath New Zealand and its surrounding waters. Geologists officially recognized it in the early 2000s. 80% underwater, once above sea level, once connected, once home. And if Zealandia, then why not Mu? Mu is Lemuria's twin, its Pacific echo. The name came from Augustus Laplangen, an eccentric 19th century archaeologist who claimed to translate ancient Mayan texts that described a vanished continent. He called it Mu, said it was the motherland of all ancient civilizations. Atlantis was just its satellite. Egypt and Sumer, pale shadows of Mu's light. Most scholars rolled their eyes so hard they saw their own brains. But the believers they believed hard. James Churchward, an English colonel turned mystic, doubled down, claimed he read Nakal tablets in India describing Mu in glowing detail, a paradise of crystal technology and spiritual enlightenment. 10,000 years before our first temple, wiped out by fire and flood. Stop us if this sounds familiar. Because it is familiar. This isn't just Atlantis Part 2. This is the chorus of every pre-flood myth, every memory mankind can't quite forget. A pattern burned into the bones of culture itself. And while scientists scoff at the idea of Mu, the Earth doesn't always play by scientific rules. Take Nan Madol, an ancient city built on 92 artificial islands off the coast of Pohnpei in Micronesia. Massive basalt columns weighing up to 50 tons, no quarries nearby, no tools, no cranes, just black stone stacked in a lagoon, in patterns so complex they defy explanation. Local legends say it was built by magic, or giants, or both. What if it was Lemurian? What if it was what's left? Because Mu and Lemuria refuse to die. They come back, again and again, in the cracks of our knowledge. In the ruins we can't date. In the texts we can't translate. In the genetic outlier stripes with markers that don't fit anywhere. In cultures with memories of floods, of islands swallowed by the sea, of skyships and firestones and golden cities that rose and fell before the stars had names. And then there's Easter Island, smack in the middle of the Pacific, thousands of miles from anything, home to massive stone heads, carved by a people whose origins are still debated. Polynesians, sure, but their oral history speaks of long-ear people, of navigators from the west, of a place they came from, not to, a place that sank. Sound familiar? And don't forget the Rongo script, an undeciphered writing system found only on Easter Island, a unique script in total isolation, hinting at a culture with roots far deeper than anyone wants to admit. Now let's turn the lights off for a second. Imagine a world, not just before history, but before memory. A planet shaped by slow catastrophe, rising seas, falling skies, comet impacts, tectonic tantrums. Civilizations that climb too high and fell too hard. The survivors scatter. Stories turn to songs, songs turn to silence. But some things echo, like pyramids, found on every continent, not just in Egypt and Mexico, but in China, in Bosnia, under the sea off the coast of Japan, shapes too similar to be coincidence. Designs too advanced to be tribal accidents. Maybe they didn't copy each other. Maybe they remembered. Lemuria may not have had lemurs. Mu may not have had maps. But together they form a constellation of suspicion, a whisper in the cracks of the timeline. A reminder that the ocean keeps secrets and we're just starting to knock on the door. The question isn't whether they existed. The question is how much of their story we're willing to see. Because if Lemuria and Mu were real, if a vast, interconnected civilization once stretched across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, then the map of prehistory is wrong, the timeline is wrong, the narrative is wrong. And it didn't vanish in peace. Legends tell of fire from the sky, of wars with Atlantis, of gods who turned away, of temples swallowed by tsunamis, the earth itself rising in rebellion. It ended not with silence, but with screaming. And it left behind echoes. In the ruins we don't understand. In the myths we dismiss. In the names we still whisper, even when we don't believe. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. The first empire, the second empire, and somewhere between them, a bridge. But that bridge didn't just span oceans. It spanned time. And now we cross again, eastward, into the ice and the impossible, to a place beyond the north wind, a land where the sun never sets, where the people never age, where death forgets your name. They called it Hyperborea. If your mind's already spinning, hit that subscribe button, we're just getting started. This journey's global, and we want to know who's traveling with us. Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from, and what time is it as you watch? Let's map this mystery together, one time zone at a time. Hyperborea. Hyperborea wasn't a place. Not really. It was a rumor, a dream, a cardinal direction warped by myth until it pointed not north but up towards something unreachable. A land so far from the known world it couldn't even be seenly sensed. An eternal summer hidden in the coldest place on earth. In Greek mythology, Hyperborea lay beyond Boreas, the god of the north wind, hence the name Hyper beyond, Boreath, north. But what lay beyond the north in ancient times? Nothing. Madness. Death. The edge of the map, scribbled with sea serpents and curses, and that's where Hyperborea lived, somewhere between heaven and hypothermia. It was perfect, too perfect. The people there were ageless, deathless, spoke a tongue unknown to any Greek but understood by all hearts. They worshipped Apollo, the god of light and reason. According to legend, he spent his winters among them, riding a golden swan chariot across skies that never turned gray. It was paradise without a passport. A civilization so pure it had no need for politics, war, or irony. Just music, sunshine, and a really aggressive real estate portfolio in the Arctic Circle. And that's where things get weird. Because while Hyperborea began as poetry, it refused to stay there. Pythagoras, that triangle guy, claimed he got some of his knowledge from Hyperborea. So did other initiates of ancient mystery schools. Philosophers whispered about it. Historians danced around it. And the name kept resurfacing, like a continent that forgot how to sink. Modern scholars, of course, scoff. They call Hyperborea a fantasy, a metaphor, a symptom of ancient sunstroke. But here's the thing. Too many cultures say the same thing. The Celts believed in a land beyond the northern sea where the dead went to rest. The Norse called it Thule, a place so far north the sun dipped but never vanished. The Vedas spoke of Uttarakuru, a northern realm of peace and eternal light. The Chinese called it Shambhala's Mirora place, unreachable by foot, but always just over the horizon of the soul. Even the Inuit, who actually live in the Arctic, have tales of a warm land at the pole, ringed by mountains, inhabited by spirits or ancient people who vanished into the ice. So, what are we looking at? A shared delusion? Or the corrupted memory of something real? Let's go full tilt. Let's talk geology. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, there were actual scientific proposals of a temperate Arctic, based on early reports of open polar seas, bizarre plant fossils, and warm-blooded animals found way too far north. Some scientists believed there might be land, maybe even habitable land beneath the polar ice cap. Today, satellite imaging and deep core samples reveal that the Arctic wasn't always frozen. In fact, during the Pliocene epoch, roughly 3 to 5 million years ago, the region was lush. Forests, rivers, life. But what about 12,000 years ago? That's the pivot point, the end of the last ice age, the Younger Dryas, a time of global cataclysm. Melting glaciers, rising seas, violent weather shifts. And possibly, just possibly, the end of a civilization that lived where no one should. Could Hyperborea have been real? A pre-Ice Age civilization built in the Arctic when the Earth was tilted differently, the climate was warmer, and the poles weren't death sentences? It's not as insane as it sounds. Let's bring in the concept of crustal displacement. Popularized by Charles Hapgood and famously supported by Albert Einstein, the idea suggests the entire outer shell of Earth can shift in one catastrophic movement, not plate tectonics inching along over eons, but a lurch. A planetary reset. If such an event occurred, say, due to an imbalance in Earth's rotational axis, it could have relocated entire continents overnight. What's tropical could become frozen. What's fertile could become buried. A civilization thriving in a temperate northern zone could wake up encased in glacial ice. And suddenly, Hyperborea isn't a myth. It's a victim. There's another clue hidden in the maps again. The 1537 Orontius Phineas map depicts Antarctica but not the icy mass we know. A continent with rivers, mountains, and ice-free coastlines. That map also places land around the North Pole, islands, waterways, patterns of habitation. How did they know? Who told them? We assume ancient people didn't travel far, but what if they didn't need to? What if the center of the world wasn't the equator but the pole? In esoteric traditions, Hyperborea becomes more than geography. It becomes origin, the Aryan cradle, the source of light and wisdom and all that came after. Dangerous ideas sprouted from that soil in the 20th century, twisted into nationalist myth. But strip away the ideology, and you're left with something even stranger, a recurring belief that the North was once not a wasteland, but a beginning. An axis mundi, a pole of peace. And maybe the reason we can't find Hyperborea is because we're looking with the wrong instruments. It's not in our maps, it's in our blood. Genetic studies have uncovered curious anomalies in northern populations. Certain mitochondrial DNA markers suggest migrations from places that shouldn't exist. Haplogroups that don't fit the standard out-of-Africa model. Echoes of an ancient diaspora, radiating not into the north but out of it. And what of the megaliths? Yes, they're mostly found near the equator, but their mathematical alignment solstices, cardinal points, stellar mapsol points somewhere, often, bizarrely, toward the pole. Not the modern pole, but an older one, a previous axis, a place where the sun may have shone differently, where civilizations oriented their temples to a sky that no longer exists. So here's the speculative bomb. Hyperborea was not just a place. It was the first blueprint, a cultural singularity, a society so old it became legend before the flood, so advanced it didn't need monuments, its memory was carried in myth, and so isolated that when the world shifted, it simply disappeared beneath the cold. But it didn't die. It whispered. To the Greeks, to the Hindus, to the Norse and the Celts and the Siberian shamans, a shared dream of a northern Eden, a people who never fought, a land that never aged. The human soul's memory of the first place it felt at peace. And if that's true, if Hyperborea existed, then what else lies beneath our forgetting? What else waits under the ice? Because the further we go back, the less we remember. And the less we remember, the more we mythologize. But myths are not lies. They're fragments, snapshots of things too large to survive intact. Hyperborea might be gone, but the next civilization wasn't, not completely. It didn't live above us, it lived below. Not in the sky, not in the sea, but inside the earth itself. Agartha. Agartha isn't a city, it's an inversion. A civilization turned inside out, a mirror to the surface world, only older, deeper, and infinitely stranger. While others sank into the sea or vanished under ice, Agartha slipped downward, into legend, into the earth. The myth of Agartha begins where logic ends, at the center of the planet. According to a stew of esoteric traditions, conspiracy theories, and whispered Tibetan folklore, Agartha is a vast, hidden world inside the hollow earth. Not a cave, not a bunker. A full-blown subterranean empire, glowing with its own sun, populated by beings who never forgot the old knowledge. Too much? Let's rewind. The idea of a world beneath our feet is not new. It didn't start with Jules Verne or fringe YouTubers. The Greeks spoke of Hades. The Norse described Svartalfaheimer, the realm of subterranean beings. Hindu cosmology is stacked with layers of Patala Loka subterranean realms of immense beauty and advanced technology. The Buddhists whisper of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of enlightened beings, sometimes described as being accessible only through secret tunnels under the Himalayas. And then there's Agartha, the beating heart beneath them all. The name itself emerged from theosophical texts in the 19th century, particularly those spun by Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre. He didn't just speculate. He described, detailed, mapped. Agartha, he said, was ruled by a sovereign known as the King of the World. Its society was hierarchical but benevolent, spiritually evolved, technologically advanced. Agartha was what humanity could have been if we hadn't gotten distracted by power, war, and breakfast cereal. Saint Yves claimed Agartha wasn't just real, it was aware, watching, waiting, sending occasional emissaries to the surface when we screwed up too badly. Kind of like divine tech support. Lunacy? Probably. But here's where things get uncomfortable. Too many breadcrumbs lead in the same direction. In 1926, renowned Russian mystic and painter Nicholas Roerich embarked on an expedition through Central Asia. He claimed to have encountered monks who confirmed the existence of Agartha, describing it as an underground realm connected by tunnels spanning continents from Mongolia to the Amazon to Antarctica. He didn't say if it existed. He asked why we had forgotten. And Roerich wasn't alone. Ferdynand Ossendowski, a Polish explorer, wrote a book in 1922 titled Beasts, Men, and Gods. In it, he recounts tales told to him by Mongolian lamas of a subterranean kingdom called Agartha, where the king of the world rules over a vast population of enlightened beings. They told him Agarthans possessed powerful technologies, including machines that could see events happening on the other side of the planet. One monk, with a face like a stone carving, said, "When the barbarians come again, the king will surface. He will not come in peace." Chilling. But it gets better, or worse depending on your worldview. Enter the Nazis. In one of the more deranged chapters of real history, Nazi occultists, particularly those within the Ahnenerbe, a research institute founded by Heinrich Himmler, became obsessed with Agartha. They believed in a hollow earth, believed there were openings at the poles. Some claimed that Agarthans were the ancestors of the Aryan race, and that ancient wisdom had been hidden, their wisdom that could restore the race. 1938 expedition to Tibet sought the entrance to Agartha. They didn't find it or didn't come back. Either way, what they did find were temples with intricate mandalas resembling maps of a world within a world, concentric rings, mountains, suns, a geography that didn't match Earth's surface, but matched something. And then there's the science. Or at least, the stuff masquerading as it. Hollow Earth theory has been debunked by mainstream geology. The pressure and heat at Earth's core are simply too great. But what hasn't been explained are the persistent anomalies, strange magnetic fluctuations at the poles, unexplained subterranean echoes, deep borehole experiments, like the Kola super deep borehole, that encountered baffling heat spikes and inexplicable sounds far below the surface. Even modern seismology, or clearest window into the Earth's interior, admits uncertainty. We know what should be there. Liquid outer core, solid inner core. But we've never seen it, never touched it. And the Earth's crust, where all of human history lives, is less than 1% of the planet's volume. That's a lot of space. To hide a lot of history. Let's talk tunnels. All over the world, ancient tunnels stretch for miles, dug through rock with techniques we can't fully explain. In Europe, there are Neolithic tunnel networks running for hundreds of miles beneath the soil. No lighting, no soot, just clean-cut passageways leading. Where? In South America, the Inca spoke of Chincanas underground roads leading to lost cities. Jesuit missionaries feared them. Modern explorers have vanished in them. And in the Himalayas, Tibetan monks still speak of Shangri-La, a paradise not above the clouds, but below the peaks, accessible only by invitation, guarded by silence. Could these be outposts, entrance ramps to the Agarthan interstate? Even weirder. Some claim Agartha wasn't always underground, that it used to be surface level, that it was pushed beneath the earth during a cataclysm, maybe a war, maybe a pole shift, maybe something worse. A civilization that escaped downward rather than outward, buried not by accident, but design. So what would that mean? It means our myths of giants, of gods, of sky people, maybe they didn't come from above, maybe they came from below, and maybe they still do. Some UFO sightings, those involving craft rising from lakes or disappearing into mountains, match suspiciously well with the concept of Agarthan vehicles, not flying saucers, subterranean saucers, operating with physics we don't understand, or maybe just forgot. And here's the kicker. Agartha might not be alone. The theory goes deeper. It suggests a network. Agartha, yes, but also Shambhala, Telos, Urks, a latticework of ancient sanctuaries, places where knowledge was preserved after surface civilizations collapsed, where memory didn't die, it just hid. And now, with climate change melting the ice caps, with earthquakes shifting fault lines, with sonar scans mapping the unthinkable, Agartha is surfacing again, not in form, in idea. The collective unconscious is cracking, and through those cracks, whispers. What if the real secret is this? That we are not the first humans to walk this earth, not the first builders, not the first dreamers. And Agartha, it isn't just a lost city. It's a time capsule. A pressure vault of pre-flood intelligence, ethics, and memory stirred below because the surface was never safe. The surface never lasts. Agartha does. So if Agartha is the hidden root, what's the flower? That would be its twin, its mirror, a land not buried but concealed, not below but above, yet unreachable. A kingdom among the clouds, guarded by snow and silence. It's time to ascend, to find a path to Shambhala. Shambhala. High above the smog-choked valleys and the rickety rooftops of the human story, in the jagged embrace of the Himalayas, there's a legend older than the mountains that carry it. A place so pure, so serene, that even time forgets how to pass. Its name is whispered by monks, buried in scriptures, and chased by madmen and mystics alike. Shambhala. The word tastes like wind, like cold incense, like the echo of something lost. In Sanskrit it means place of peace or place of silence. But no silence has ever been louder. At first glance, Shambhala seems like a spiritual mirage, just another holy hallucination from humanity's bottomless thirst for paradise. But look again, dig deeper. Strip away the incense, smoke, and chanting, and you find something chillingly consistent, a civilization that does not die, a realm of advanced knowledge. Hidden, not because it's weak, but because it's dangerous. The roots of Shambhala run through Tibetan Buddhism, where it is described in the Kalachakra Tantra, an ancient and dense text that reads like a mix of astrophysics, metaphysics, and military prophecy. It speaks of a hidden kingdom in Central Asia, surrounded by snow-capped mountains and accessible only to the pure of heart, those with the right vibration. Think GPS, but for karma. Shambhala isn't just a pretty place. It's a city of glass and emeralds. A realm ruled by kings who are also sages, scientists who are also warriors. The capital, Kalapa, is described with eerie specificity. Symmetrical buildings, a giant central palace, and towers that hum with energy not drawn from oil or fire, but from something far older, something tapped, not burned. According to the texts, the current ruler king Rudra Chakrinasant, sitting on a throne sipping enlightenment, he's waiting, watching, preparing, because Shambhala is not just a sanctuary, it's a clock, a doomsday machine wound tight with prophecy. According to legend, when the world falls into chaos, when barbarism rules, when corruption poisons the mind and machine becomes master, then the gates of Shambhala will open. Rudra Chakran will emerge with his army. Not metaphorical armies, literal ones. Battalions of enlightened warriors riding robotic white horses that glow with light, wielding weapons forged from wisdom and wrath. They won't negotiate. They won't convert. They'll reset. And the world will start over. Sounds intense, almost laughable, until you realize how many people have gone looking for it. In 1924, Russian painter and mystic Nicholas Roerich, yes, again, launched an expedition across India, Tibet, and Mongolia, with the stated goal of finding Shambhala. Funded in part by secret societies and intelligence services, because why not, Roerich claimed to have received telepathic messages, seen UFOs, and been guided by local monks who insisted the kingdom was real, just out of sync. Roerich described Shambhala not as a fantasy, but as a parallel reality, a civilization operating on a higher frequency, hidden like a radio station just off the dial. You don't see it, you tune into it. And the kicker? He wasn't alone. The Nazis, always a red flag in any story, also got in on the Shambhala hunt. Himmler's occultist pet project, the unearth, believed Shambhala and Agartha held the secrets of Aryan origins and ancient power. Expeditions were dispatched, documents vanished. Myths were twisted, and like so many before them, they came back with empty hands and glassy eyes. But the footprints are still there. Tibetan texts say Shambhala can only be found by those who are destined to, that it cannot be reached by force, only by readiness, that its borders are guarded not by soldiers, but by truth itself. And if your truth is corrupt, if your soul is crooked, you'll never even find the gate. Maybe that's why we call it myth. Because the idea of a place that refuses to be found is easier than the idea of a place that chooses who finds it. But here's where Shambhala gets even stranger. The Kalachakra texts describe the kingdom not just spiritually but cosmologically, as if it exists in parallel with our world, nested like Russian dolls. Some versions suggest Shambhala occupies a pure land, a dimension tethered to our own but phased slightly out of sync, not up, not down, through. A fourth-dimensional fortress, a civilization behind the veil. And according to prophecy, Shambhala has been watching. Every fall, every flood, every empire rising with fanfare and collapsing in fire, Shambhala remembers. Because it's older than Babylon, older than Atlantis, older than the flood. It wasn't destroyed. It hid. And maybe that's the point. Atlantis sank. Lemuria sank. Hyperborea froze. Agartha burrowed. But Shambhala? Shambhala waited. So where is it? The Himalayas are a convenient scapegoat. Huge, inhospitable, riddled with valleys, caves, and blank map coordinates. But some say it's not a physical location at all. Some say it moves. A mobile city, a civilization out of phase with the world, glimpsed only during certain astronomical alignments or when specific mantras are spoken at high altitudes. A place that rotates through reality like a lighthouse beam, revealing itself to the worthy, the mad, and the desperate. What's even wilder? There are stories, not ancient ones, modern ones, of travelers who vanished in the mountains, of pilgrims who returned changed, with eyes too calm, hands that healed, minds that knew. They don't talk much, but sometimes they smile, as if they've seen something too big for words. And then there are the tunnels. Again, the tunnels. Some believe Shambhala is linked to the Agartha network, a spiritual capital connected by electromagnetic highways beneath the crust. That its location isn't static, but strategic, set at the confluence of ley lines, magnetic anomalies, and cosmic intersections. That the kingdom is powered not just by technology, but by alignment. Call it spiritual Wi-Fi. So what do we make of all this? Is Shambhala a real place? A psychic echo? An interdimensional fallout shelter? Maybe yes, maybe all. Because here's the real horror. If Shambhala exists, it proves one thing beyond doubt. That we were never alone. That someone or something has been watching from the shadows. Not aliens, not gods, but humans like us, just older, wiser, tired. And now, with our world teetering, with floods creeping back, fires rising, and truth itself becoming a luxury, the prophecy ticks louder. The gates creak. The army stirs. Rudra Chakran sharpens his sword not out of malice, but necessity. And when the gates open, it won't be a sermon. It'll be a reckoning. But before the clouds part and the horsemen ride, let's take one last look backward. To a civilization not hidden in myth or mysticism but inked in ancient scripture. A civilization that fought wars in the sky. That wrote in math. That built cities of flying machines and cosmic engines. You know its name. The Rama Empire. Rama Empire. Ancient India. Before Greece dreamed of democracy. Before Babylon built its towers. Before Egypt carved gods into stone. There was a civilization that spoke in thunder and flew in fire. The Rama Empire. You won't find it in your high school textbooks. At best, it's a footnotean interpretation of Indian mythology, usually waved off with the intellectual equivalent of a shrug. But open the Mahabharata. Crack the spine of the Ramayana. These aren't fairy tales. They're war logs, technical manuals, ancient science fiction without the fiction. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This was not a civilization of loincloths and cow-worshipping caricatures. This was a world of flying machines, of laser weapons, of nuclear war. No exaggeration. Let's begin with the texts. The Mahabharata, clocking in at over 200,000 verses, is one of the longest epic poems in existence. It's also one of the most terrifying. In the Bhagavad Gita, Aloni, arguably the most serene part of the saga, God casually reveals the nature of the universe before encouraging a prince to commit genocide because, cosmically, it doesn't matter. Elsewhere, in the Vanaparva, we read of celestial chariots that could travel vast distances in a moment, both in the sky and under the sea. Weapons are described that cause blindness, hair loss, and spontaneous combustion. There's a projectile, the Brahmastra, that blazes with the power of 1,000 suns and leaves the land scorched, the rivers poisoned, and survivors driven mad. Sound familiar? J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, famously quoted the Gita after the first successful nuclear test. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. But what most people don't know is that he wasn't being poetic, he was being literal. In a later interview, When asked if that was the first nuclear explosion in history, he reportedly said, "Well, yes, in modern history." Modern history. Let that sit. Because the clues are everywhere. In Drona Parva, another book of the Mahabharata, a warrior named Ashwatthama unleashes a weapon so deadly it destroys embryos in the womb. The land turns infertile. Animals die. Rain won't fall. Survivors' skin peels in sheets. There are descriptions of shock waves, mushroom clouds, and radioactive after effects in Sanskrit 3,000 years ago, and then there are the Vimanas. If you've ever heard the word Vimana, odds are you associate it with ancient aliens, thanks to the History Channel's endless buffet of poorly CGI'd nonsense. But Vimanas are not fringe lore. They are described in multiple Indian texts, from the Vedas to the Mahabharata, as flying chariots made of metal, powered by mercury or other complex engines. They had vertical takeoff. Some were disc-shaped, others were pyramidic, some even went underwater, and they were armed. Descriptions include mirrors for stealth, beams that could cut through armor, and propulsion systems that bent gravity itself. In the Samarangana Sutradhara, a 10th century Sanskrit treatise on engineering and architecture, an entire chapter is dedicated to the mechanical details of Vimanas, their construction, their control panels, their flight protocols. This isn't allegory. It's specification. Now here's where things get messy. If these were just stories, we'd chalk it up to mythology. Everyone loves a good sky war, but the physical evidence refuses to shut up. Let's talk Mohenjo-Daro. Located in modern-day Pakistan, this ancient city was part of the Indus Valley Civilization, an urban marvel of the 3rd millennium BCE. Running water, grid-planned streets, multi-story buildings, and radiation. In the 1920s, archaeologists uncovered skeletons lying in the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, not buried, not placed, just dropped, as if something massive and sudden had vaporized the population mid-step. Some bodies were found holding hands. One showed signs of being fused to the stone beneath it. Radiation levels were reportedly 50 times higher than normal. The city's bricks were vitrified melted, as if by intense heat. No volcanoes, no wildfires, just heat. And then there's Jodhpur. In the Rajasthan desert, researchers have found a layer of radioactive ash covering a 3-square-mile area. Geologists couldn't explain it. There's no nuclear facility nearby, no mining. Just residual radiation, deep in the earth, right where legends place one of the final battles of the Mahabharata. Still think it's just mythology? Let's zoom out. The Rama Empire wasn't a city. It wasn't even a kingdom. It was a network. A Pan-Asian confederation of technologically and spiritually advanced societies spanning modern-day India, Pakistan, Nepal, Tibet, and perhaps beyond into Southeast Asia, maybe even China. Connected by trade, war, religion, and science. It was ruled not by politicians but by rishisages, with the power to bend reality through spiritual alignment and technological mastery. Some believe the rishis were not born, but made. That enlightenment in the Rama Empire wasn't a spiritual goal, it was a requirement for governance, a civilization that did not separate science from soul. And they had enemies. The Asuras, the Nagas, the Rakshasas. Some say these were demons. Others say they were just another branch of humanity, one that took a different technological path, one that valued power over wisdom. According to some fringe researchers, the war between Rama and the Asura factions wasn't metaphorical. It was intercontinental, interdimensional, and intertemporal. A war that ended not with surrender, but mutual destruction. And yet remnants remain. Temples aligned with constellations that only made sense 10,000 years ago. Massive stone lingams with unexplained magnetic properties. blueprints for flying machines hidden in coded Sanskrit, vibrations in mantras that match electromagnetic frequencies, and a lingering feeling, especially in the Himalayan foothills, that something remembers. This isn't nostalgia, it's trauma. Because what if the Rama Empire didn't end? What if it went silent? Some claim its last survivors retreated underground into the same tunnel systems that feed into Agartha. Others believe they phased out of our reality entirely, entering a higher dimension where they wait, watching, guiding. And some think the Rama Empire was never truly gone, that its echoes can be felt in every burst of genius, every leap of technology, every civilization that suddenly bloomed without warning. What if we're not inventing? What if we're remembering? Because the story of Rama is the story of every rise and fall, of brilliance poisoned by pride, of civilizations that grew so powerful they forgot the earth could bleed, and when it did, they vanished. Not into the sea, not into myth, into memory. And if that's true, if the Rama Empire was real, and its wars were nuclear, and its knowledge encoded in mantra and stone, then our modern world is not a miracle. It's a reboot. But just as we begin to grasp that, to accept that ancient India may have reached heights we still dream of, another mystery yanks us deeper, one older than dynasties, one buried beneath the pyramids, a civilization that never had a name, only a face, a god. Osiris. Osirian civilization, Egypt. Before there were pharaohs, before pyramids kissed the clouds, before the Nile had a name, there was something else. Not Egypt. Not yet. Something older. The Osirian civilization. It is the ghost kingdom beneath the golden mask of Egypt, the bones beneath the sarcophagus, a civilization remembered, not in annals, but in allegories. One that never signed its name to stone but left fingerprints anyone, temples misaligned, technologies misunderstood, and gods that seem too real. Start with Osiris. In most tellings, he's a deity, a fertility god, lord of the dead, the one who taught man agriculture and laws. But scrape off the symbolism, and something else glimmers underneath. Something human. According to the ancient Egyptian priest Manetho writing during the 3rd century BC, there were dynasties that ruled before the dynasties, gods, demigods, and spirits of the dead who reigned for tens of thousands of years. Osiris was one of them, a king, a bringer of light, not a mythic figure in a parable, but a ruler. Flesh and blood. And when you follow Osiris through the labyrinth of Egyptian myth, you realize he didn't rule in a fantasy, he ruled in Zep-Tepi. The first time. Egyptian cosmology refers to Zep-Tepi as a golden age when the gods walked among men, when civilization appeared fully formed, not through evolution but revelation. Overnight, as if someone turned on a light switch. Language, architecture, astronomy, mathematics. All at once, boom. Zep-Tepi was not the dawn. It was the memory of a rebirth. And the place most tied to that memory? Abydos. Abydos is one of the oldest sites in Egypt, an ancient necropolis, a city of the dead. But before it housed graves, it housed something else. The Temple of Seti I. Carved into its walls, high above the heads of tourists and skeptics, is the so-called Abydos helicopter. You've seen the pictures. A relief panel depicting what looked like a modern helicopter, a submarine, and a planial crammed together in a tight formation like some sort of 3,000-year-old aviation meme. Mainstream Egyptologists say it's a palimpsest overlapping hieroglyphs eroded into suggestive shapes. But maybe it's not erosion. Maybe it's remembrance. Maybe the priests of Abydos weren't drawing what they saw, they were drawing what they remembered. Now go west, to Dendera. There, in the Hathor temple, you'll find the so-called Dendera light. It's a carved scene depicting a lotus flower from which a serpent emerges, enclosed in what looks remarkably like a glass bulb. Inside the bulb, a wire, a filament, a power source held by what looks like an insulator. Next to it, a priest operates what appears to be a control device. To the untrained eye, it looks like Egyptian art. To the suspicious mind, it looks like a light bulb. And don't stop there. Let's get to the big boys. The pyramids. We are told they were tombs. That three pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure commissioned them during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BCE. We are told they were built with copper tools and manpower. We are told this with a straight face. But we've never found a mummy in a pyramid. Not one. What we have found are anomalies. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned almost perfectly to true north within 3/60ths of a degree. Its dimensions encode the golden ratio, pi, and the speed of light, if you use meters, which the Egyptians weren't supposed to have. It stands at a height of 146.6 meters, which corresponds to 1/1000th the distance from Earth to the Sun. Coincidence? Maybe one. But all of them? The interior shafts align with Orion's belt and Sirius, the same stars associated with Osiris and Isis. The entire Giza Plateau is a stone map of the sky in 10,500 BCE. Wait, what? Yes, that date again. 10,500 BCE. The same rough window as the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. The same rough window as Plato's Atlantis. The same window that just keeps popping up in myths, disguised as history. What if the pyramids weren't built in 2500 BCE, but restored? What if the dynastic Egyptians didn't construct them from scratch, but inherited them, maintained them, rebranded them? That's the Osirian theory. That a pre-dynastic civilization, call it Osirian, or Zeptepian, or just Lost Egypt, built the megalithic core of ancient Egypt using knowledge we still can't replicate, not with copper tools, not with ramps. Not in 20 years. And certainly not with a population barely out of the Stone Age. Let's talk the Osirian. Located at Abydos, the Osirian is one of the strangest structures in Egypt. Sunken below ground level, constructed from massive granite blocks weighing 50 to 100 tons each, and using a style of construction that doesn't match anything else from its alleged time period. The official narrative dates it to Seti I, but the construction is so drastically different from his other temples that many suspect it predates dynastic Egypt by millennia. Sound familiar? It should. Because it's not just the architecture, it's the purpose. According to myth, this was where Osiris was buried. But why bury a god in a megalithic water-cooled granite box? Unless Osiris wasn't a god. Unless he was a king. And the Osirian wasn't a tomb. It was a machine. Some fringe researchers believe it was part of an ancient energy systema power plant, or a resonance chamber, or a hydraulic device. Why? Because of the water, the granite, the layout, all of which match the needs for generating piezoelectric energy. A power source. One that might have powered, what? Well, let's loop back to Dendera, to the light bulbs, to the helicopter hieroglyphs, to the pyramid shafts that could have channeled microwave energy, to a civilization that didn't separate spirituality and science, that used geometry and vibration as tools. Sound crazy? Then explain why we can't build the Great Pyramid today with modern cranes. Explain why we don't understand how the stones were cut, moved, and placed with surgical precision. Explain why there's not a single depiction of pyramid construction anywhere in Egyptian art. Not one. Because maybe they didn't build them. Maybe they found them. Like discovering an iPhone in a cave. And that brings us back to Osiris. In myth, he is dismembered and scattered, but in symbol, he is rebirth, he is resurrection, He is the embodiment of a civilization that died but refused to disappear. The Osirian civilization didn't fall. It transformed into Egypt, into legend, into gods. And if the Osirian builders were real, if they encoded their knowledge in stone, buried their machines in temples, and allowed themselves to be mythologized, then we have been staring at our ancestors and calling them cartoons. But the Osirians are not alone. Another city, older still, was buried not by sand or story, but by design. And when it surfaced, it shattered everything. 7 lost civilizations down, and the deeper we go, the darker it gets. If you're still here, you're built for this. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Let's see how far across time and place this story really reaches. Göbekli Tepe. It was never supposed to exist. When archaeologist Klaus Schmidt uncovered the first T-shaped monolith in 1994, the academic world blinked, scratched its head, and checked the date. Because what stood before him, half buried in the hills of southeastern Turkey, was not a primitive site, not a random stone circle. It was architecture, and it was older than anything ever found. Göbekli Tepe, literally Potbelly Hill, doesn't just break the timeline of civilization. It burns it, buries the ashes, and then carves an obelisk about it just to gloat. Dated to around 9,600 BCE, it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years, the Egyptian pyramids by over 7,000. Agriculture, writing, the wheel, all came later. And yet here it stands, not a ruin of a tribe, not the leftovers of hunter-gatherers, but a cathedral, a temple, a cosmic machine of stone and symbol. And it wasn't just built. It was buried. Deliberately, carefully, as if someone wanted it forgotten. So what the hell is Göbekli Tepe? Let's start with what we know. The site consists of at least 20 circular enclosures, only a handful of which have been fully excavated. Each circle contains massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some over 18 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are arranged in pairs, facing each other across the circle, like frozen giants locked in conversation. Some are bare. Others are carved with images: foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, lions, predators, omens, symbols. And then there's Pillar 43, the vulture stone, a scene etched into the surface, interpreted by some as an astronomical chart, a depiction of constellations, a memory of the sky. But here's where things tilt into madness. Some researchers, particularly the team behind the 2017 paper published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, suggest that Pillar 43 records a cataclysm. Specifically, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposed comet strike around 10,800 BCE that triggered a sudden return to Ice Age conditions, killing off megafauna and possibly wiping out advanced prehistoric societies. In other words, Göbekli Tepe may be not just a temple. It may be a warning. A time capsule left behind by a civilization that survived something the rest of the world forgot. A message in stone: we were here, we saw the sky burn, and we remembered. Now hold that thought. Because here's the kicker. Göbekli Tepe was built by people who were supposed to be illiterate, disorganized, and nomadic. The standard model of human development tells us agriculture came first. Farming led to surplus. Surplus led to cities. Cities led to civilization. But Göbekli Tepe flips the script. There was no farming here, no permanent settlement. Yet someone mobilized massive labor forces. Someone quarried and transported stone. Someone had the astronomical and architectural knowledge to align structures with celestial events. Someone created culture before agriculture. Which means the builders were not primitive. They were post-something. What if they weren't rising out of savagery? What if they were remembering? Rebuilding? Recovering from a fall? Because something doesn't add up. Why build such a massive complex, only to bury it? Why hide it under tons of backfill, layer by layer, like a tomb? Archaeologists agree, the burial wasn't the work of erosion or nature. It was intentional, systematic, almost reverent. As if the builders knew it wasn't for them. As if they were preserving it for a time when it would be needed. Maybe us. And remember, only 5% of the site has been excavated. We are looking at the surface of a civilization's iceberg. Beneath the soil, literally miles of untouched structures, may lie the real story, the real tech, the real memory. Some suggest Göbekli Tepe wasn't alone. Across Anatolia, other sites are being uncovered. Karahan Tepe, Navali Chori, Sayonu. Similar architecture, similar symbols, similar shock, a network, a system, not isolated, not accidental. A civilization, one that we never knew existed, one that might have seeded everything else. Because here's the truly dangerous idea. What if Egypt didn't teach the world? What if Mesopotamia didn't invent civilization? What if they inherited it? What if the spark came from Göbekli Tepe? And what if Göbekli Tepe's builders were not inventing religion, art, and science, but trying to reconstruct it? A cultural black box, a manual for civilization, a cry across time, this is how you do it, this is how you survive. Remember the stars, remember the beasts, remember the rhythm of the earth and the breath of the gods. Even the layout of the enclosure's concentric circles, radiating design feels ritualistic, cosmic, not random. These were not campsites. These were altars, calendars, maps, and maybe even machines. That's right, machines. Some researchers believe the layout of the pillars, combined with the acoustics of the enclosures, suggests resonant properties. That sound rituals were performed chanting, drumming, vibrations that could induce trance or transmit knowledge. That Göbekli Tepe functioned as a brain, not just a temple, a device for consciousness. A transmitter. Sound crazy? Then explain why a people without writing carved abstract symbols H-like glyphs, serpentine lines, and non-figurative shapes into every stone. Symbols that don't match any known proto-script, but appear to communicate something. It's as if they knew writing would come later, but memory couldn't wait. So what happened? Why bury it? Some think they foresaw the collapse, that the memory of the cataclysm was still raw. The skies had burned once. They could burn again, so they hid their wisdom not in books, but in bedrock, hoping someone would one day listen. That day may be now, because with every new discovery, every drone scan, every dig site, Göbekli Tepe grows louder. It is not a site frozen in time, it is a fuse. Karahan Tepe. If Göbekli Tepe cracked open the story of civilization, then Karahan Tepe blew the back wall clean off. Located just 35 kilometers southeast of its more famous sibling, Karahan Tepe doesn't bask in the same international spotlight yet. But in the hushed corridors of archaeology and the fevered forums of alternative history, it's becoming something else entirely. The missing piece, the deeper layer, the before to Göbekli Tepe's after. Because if Göbekli Tepe was an anomaly, Karahan Tepe makes it a pattern. What was once an isolated marvel is now part of a network, what Turkish archaeologists call the Taş Tepeler region, a constellation of prehistoric sites across southeastern Anatolia that collectively push the timeline of complex society so far back it breaks. But Karahan Tepe is different. It's stranger, bolder, raw. Discovered in the 1990s, but only seriously excavated since 2019, the site reveals a level of architectural daring and symbolic obsession that makes Göbekli Tepe look almost modest. Where Göbekli offered subtlety, Karahan Tepe shouts. Its centerpiece? A room of stone penises. Yes, you read that right. Carved out of the bedrock itself, one of the site's main enclosures contains a circle of upright T-shaped pillar sand in the middle, a series of smooth, unmistakably phallic columns rising from the floor. They aren't decorative, they aren't random, they're ritual. This is prehistoric architecture at its most unapologetically symbolic, and it gets weirder. In the same chamber sits a human face, carved into the stone wall. Not a full statue, just a head, eyes wide, mouth open, emerging like a god being born from the stone. It's positioned to stare directly at the circle of phallic columns, as if witnessing or judging some primordial rite. What does it mean? Nobody knows. And that's the point. Karahan Tepe forces us to confront a version of prehistory that isn't primitive or accidental, but intentional. These people didn't just stack rocks, they carved symbolism into bedrock. They organized space with mathematical precision. They created spaces to invoke something, whether gods, ancestors, or the deep architecture of human memory. And they did it 12,000 years ago. Before the wheel. Before agriculture. Before recorded time. Let that timeline sink in. Mainstream archaeology still clings to the idea that human civilization began around 3000 BCE with the Sumerians. That before that, we were just nomads playing with sticks. But Karahan Tepe stands like a stone middle finger to that narrative. Because you don't carve temples into hillsides by accident. You don't align monoliths with stars unless you've been watching the sky for generations. You don't summon geometry from a tent. You do it because you remember something. Something older. Maybe something lost. Let's talk tech, not iPhones. Cognitive technology, the ability to plan, to organize labor, to encode meaning into architecture. These are not luxuries of civilization, they are civilization. And Karahan Tepe has all of them. And then some. Recent discoveries include a massive carved T-pillar, over 7 meters tall, rising from a perfectly circular chamber. Subterranean tunnel systems carved directly into limestone. Water channels and basins that suggest not just ritual cleansing, but perhaps even rudimentary plumbing. Human and animal figurines with exaggerated features, eyes, limbs, genital shinting at symbolic language or ancestral worship. And here's the kicker. Just like Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe was deliberately buried. Why? Why spend decades, maybe centuries carving sacred spaces out of solid rock only to backfill them? It's not abandonment, it's preservation. These weren't collapsing societies, they were concealing something. Knowledge? Power? Or just memory too dangerous to leave exposed? One theory gaining traction. Karahan Tepe and its neighboring sites weren't just temples. They were the heart of a pre-flood civilization. A culture with spiritual practices, astronomical knowledge, and social organization that rivals what we see thousands of years later in Mesopotamia and Egypt. In other words, these people weren't learning. They were remembering, rebuilding in the aftermath of catastrophe. Let's go cosmological for a second. Many of Karahan Tepe's features align with celestial phenomena. The enclosures appear to map solar cycles. Some alignments hint at knowledge of lunar eclipses. And those underground chambers? They resonate. Literally, acoustic engineers have noted strange sound properties inside the stone enclosure stones that amplify and echo in ways that suggest the use of vibration in ritual. This isn't just architecture. It's psychoacoustic engineering. A Stone Age sound temple. A place where vibration met vibration, where chanting or drumming could alter perception, perhaps even induce altered states. Now combine that with the phallic symbolism, with the carved faces, with the subterranean depths. Karahan Tepe wasn't a city. It wasn't a fortress. It was a womb, a place of rebirth, of transformation, a sacred engine designed not to produce food or weapons but consciousness. And the people who built it? They came from somewhere. We don't know where. We don't know how. But they didn't come out of nowhere. Maybe they were survivors. Refugees of a drowned world. Lemurians, Atlanteans, Rama engineers stripped of their vimanas, wandering across Anatolia with nothing but memory and stone. Maybe they were locals who inherited the ruins and rebuilt in their image. Or maybe, just maybe, they were the origin. The architects of the reset? The ones who knew the flood would come and carve their culture into stone not because they wanted to last forever, but because they knew nothing else would. Karahan Tepe is not the start. It's the scar. The mark of a civilization that burned so brightly it left shadows we still can't explain. And those shadows stretch far. Into the soil of Sumer. Into the whispers of Egypt. Into the coded myths of every people who speak of a golden age drowned in darkness. Karahan Tepe is the skeleton key. But it doesn't unlock the past. It unlocks the lie. That we rose once, linearly, from ape to astronaut. The truth? We've risen before. Ancient Sumer. Pre-dynastic. If civilization had a birth certificate, it would probably be written in cuneiform and stamped in Sumer. Located in the marshy cradle between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumer is the first place where the human story stops whispering and starts shouting. Cities, kings, laws, war, trade, math, beer. It's all there, carved into clay and stone. The Sumerians didn't just emerge from the fog of prehistory. They burned through it, bringing fire, language, and bureaucracy to a world still stuck in the mud. But what if they weren't the beginning? What if they were the inheritors? Because buried beneath the concrete timelines of mainstream archaeology is a quieter, stranger truthone the Sumerians themselves tried to tell us. They said they came from somewhere else. Let's rewind. Textbooks will tell you that Sumer was born around 4500 BCE, with the appearance of Uruk and Eridu, temples rising like stone mushrooms in the swampy plains of southern Mesopotamia. But the Sumerians didn't write about starting civilization. They wrote about remembering it. According to their own king, list a bizarre, spine-tingling document etched into clay they were ruled before the flood, not by tribal chieftains or wandering shamans, by kings, in cities, for tens of thousands of years. Let's go slow here. The Sumerian king list begins by stating plainly, after the kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu. That's the first city, the blueprint, the cradle. But here's the kicker. Those early rulers didn't reign for decades or even centuries. They reigned for millennia. One king, Alulim, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, for 36,000. Sound ridiculous? Sure. Unless it's not. Because the king list also notes a division in time, before the flood and after. The flood is the inflection point, the great leveler. And the story it tells of cities, kings, and the great deluges not unique. It mirrors the biblical flood, the epic of Gilgamesh, the tales of Ziusudra, and echoes through every ancient civilization like thunder in a canyon. So what came before the flood? That's the mystery. That's the madness. That's the myth. The pre-dynastic Sumeriansif, we believe their texts were not primitive. They were part of a world system that vanished in water. They didn't invent writing to figure things out. They invented it to remember what had been lost. Cuneiform wasn't born out of invention. It was born out of mourning. Let's talk gods. The Sumerian pantheon is crowded. Anu, Enlil, Enki, Inanna. Sky gods, storm gods, water gods, gods of love and war and agricultural ledgers. But here's the twist. These weren't ethereal concepts. These were rulers, physical beings who lived, fought, traveled in flying chariots, and handed down laws. Sound familiar? It should. These are the Watchers of the Book of Enoch, the sons of God in Genesis. The beings that descended, interfered, and then left her, were buried beneath the earth. In Sumerian myth, Enki builds the first city, teaches humans agriculture, and warns of an impending flood. He is both savior and scientist. And the Anunnaki? Oh, the Anunnaki. Popularized and pulverized by fringe theorists, the Anunnaki are described in Sumerian texts as beings who, from heaven to earth, came. They aren't vague spiritual concepts. They have roles, jobs, interpersonal drama. They dig canals, argue over who gets to rule cities, and get into fights that sound suspiciously like interdepartmental office squabble sept. They sometimes involve weapons that could melt mountains. There's a word for that. Technology. Some scholars will wave this away as metaphor. Others point out that we still don't fully understand how Sumerians knew what they knew. Their understanding of astronomy was off the charts. They knew about planetary motion, lunar cycles, and even precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis long before the Greeks discovered it. How? By staring at the sky with the naked eye? Or because someone told them? Someone who remembered? The deeper you go, the more unsettling it gets. Take Eridu's first city. Located near modern-day Abu Sharain, Eridu is considered by archaeologists to be the oldest city in southern Mesopotamia, perhaps the world. But it didn't start small. The earliest layers of Eridu already show signs of organized planning, monumental architecture, and religious hierarchy. No mud huts, no trial and error, just boom civilization. That's not evolution. That's inheritance. Eridu's temple to Enkhite-i-Abzuaz rebuilt over 16 times on the same spot. Each layer taller, each layer more complex. Why? To maintain a memory. To keep the ritual space alive. To reach something that had fallen. Let's talk ziggurats. Massive stepped platforms. Not just religious buildings, but cosmic connectors. Microcosms of the universe. And they didn't evolve, they appeared, fully formed, with mathematical precision and celestial alignment. Many of these structures were aligned with specific stars and planets. The temple at Eridu may have aligned with Sirius the dog star, sacred in Egyptian myth and referenced in nearly every ancient sky-oriented culture. Why align stone with stars? Why track the heavens so obsessively? Because they weren't just watching the sky. They were waiting for the return of something, or the memory of something. And then there's the math. Sumerians developed the base 60 number system that we still use today for time and angles. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 360 degrees. Why 60? Why not 10? Because it's divisible. Because it's modular. Because it's engineered. They also knew about the so-called sacred geometry ratios and harmonic structures that would later appear in Egyptian pyramids, Greek temples, and Gothic cathedrals. So again we ask, did they invent this? Or remember it? Let's not forget metallurgy. Copper tools, bronze smelting, and according to some Mesopotamian texts, access to materials like El-Meshu and Nishe, mysterious metals possibly now lost or mistranslated. There's even mention of flying machines, called Gigunu, used by the gods to cross the heavens. That's not mythology. That's memory in metaphor. And that brings us back to the flood. Every Sumerian city has a version of the flood myth, but it's not just a cautionary tale. It's a pivot point, a reboot, a trauma event encoded in every clay tablet and ritual. The survivor Ziusudra in Sumerian myth, Utnapishtim in Gilgamesh not just spared, they're instructed to rebuild, to teach, to carry forward what was nearly lost. So maybe that's what Sumer really was. Not the first civilization, the first restoration, the first attempt to stand up after the fall. To remember, to write it all down before memory faded again. Because the waters always rise, the towers always fall. But if the story is written in clay and stone and stars, maybe it can survive. And maybe, buried in that memory, is a clue. A map to a city even older. A place of light and purity. A place called Dilmun. Dilmun. Dilmun is where the gods go to retire. That's how the Sumerians described Ita place, not of struggle or grandeur but purity, an oasis of calm. A city so perfect, death itself was barred from entry. It wasn't just a paradise. It was a prototype, a control group for creation. But here's the twist. Dilmun wasn't just myth, it was on the map. Somewhere in the haze of antiquity, this mythic Eden started showing up in trade records, royal correspondence, and ancient shipping manifests. Copper, pearls, lapis lazuli all heading to and from a place called Dilmun, and then it vanished. Like Eden, like Atlantis, like every too perfect thing. Let's begin where the story usually ends, with the Epic of Gilgamesh. When the half-divine king of Uruk fails to cheat death, he sets off on a journey, across the ocean, through the tunnel of the sun. To find Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah who survived the flood and was granted immortality. Where does he find him? Dilmun. And what is Dilmun? A land where the raven does not croak, where no old woman says, "I am old," where the lion does not kill, nor does the wolf devour. No death, no decay, just eternal, sparkling stillness. But this isn't just poetic fluff. The Sumerians weren't talking about heaven, they were describing a real place, east of their cities, across the Persian Gulf. And archaeologists think they may have found Iton, the island of Bahrain. That's the mainstream theory anyway. But something doesn't add up. Because the site on Bahrain, known as Qalat al-Bahraindos, shows signs of ancient urbanization, temples, burial mounds, trade hubs. But it doesn't match the scale, scope, or sacredness of the Dilmun described in Sumerian myth. And then there's the age. The Sumerians were writing about Dilmun as early as 3000 BCE, but they weren't claiming to have founded it. They said it had always been there. That Enki, god of wisdom, brought life to Dilmun before even the rivers flowed. In the Sumerian creation myth, Enki impregnates the land of Dilmun with water, transforming it from a lifeless rock into a paradise. He builds canals, plants, fruit trees, and watches over the birth of humanity. So let's ask the forbidden question. Was Dilmun the origin? Not metaphorically, literally. Was it the seed civilization? The place where memory survived the flood and flowed outward first to Sumer, then to Egypt, then to every other forgotten empire echoing its design? Let's follow the clues. Dilmun was described as an island, a sacred land where gods met, a hub of trade and transcendence, but also place with technology. In one myth, the god Enki sends messages to Dilmun using messengers of light. In another, he becomes ill and calls upon his healing priestess Ninhursag, who diagnoses his ailments organ by organ. Medical science, remote communication, advanced agriculture. Not bad for a culture that's supposed to be prehistoric. And let's not forget the architecture. The temples of Dilmun, what little remains of them, are built on ziggurat-like foundations, multi-level structures designed not just for ritual, but as cosmic connectors, altars to the sky, stairways to the stars. And then there's the copper. Dilmun wasn't just a spiritual haven, was a metallurgical powerhouse. The region's trade records show an enormous influx of copper flowing from Oman, through Dilmun, and into Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. This wasn't small-scale barter, this was industrial. Some scholars believe the copper trade alone suggests a level of organization that rivals early dynastic cities. But why copper? Because copper isn't just useful, it's symbolic. In many ancient traditions, copper is associated with Venus, with the goddess Inanna, with fertility and rebirth. It conducts energy, it kills bacteria, it glows with a soft, otherworldly hue. Maybe they weren't just trading metal. Maybe they were trading memory. A fragment of a pre-flood science, a knowledge encoded in the elements. Because the most persistent whisper about Dilmun is this: it wasn't built, it was preserved. A pocket of purity amid a shattered world. A memory palace left untouched by the deluge that drowned Atlantis and erased Rama. A place where the blueprint was kept safe. Like a seed bank. Like a sacred vault. And maybe that's why the Sumerians wrote about it with such reverence. Not as a place to conquer, but a place to remember. They didn't want to claim it. They wanted to return. And here's where things get weird. Because if Dilmun really was a center of something greater, a node in a forgotten network, then it's not alone. Similar myths pop up everywhere. A shining land to the east. A sacred island where gods walk. In Indian lore, it's Pushkara. In Persian myth, it's Veha. In Greek tales, it's the Hesperides. Always east, always shining, always just out of reach. But what if Dilmun was real? What if it was the original sanctuary? The last ember of an earlier fire? And if so, where did its people go? Some believe they became the Akkadians, others, the Elamites. But maybe they didn't vanish into empire. Maybe they went underground. Maybe they became the architects of Eridu, the priests of Ur, the anonymous builders of the ziggurats whose foundations we still can't explain. Because like all pre-flood civilizations, Dilmun leaves behind not answers, but echoes. Trade routes with no origin, legends with no ending, temples with no purpose. But perhaps the most haunting clue is this. When Gilgamesh arrives at Dilmun to seek immortality, he finds Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, the keeper of the old ways. And what does Utnapishtim tell him? You're too late. The gates are closed. The memory is fading. And that's what Dilmun is. A memory with doors that won't open. A paradise that wasn't lost to sin, but to silence. And that silence stretches farther than Mesopotamia. It reaches deeper than the Persian Gulf. Because the next city on our journey isn't sacred. It's forgotten. It wasn't the cradle. It was the first. Eridu. In the ruins of Eridu, you can hear the sound of beginnings. Not just the birth of a city, or the start of a civilization, but the first breath of everything we now call history. It doesn't look like much. Just a few crumbling mounds in the southern tip of Iraq, near the edge of the ancient marshlands. But under that dust lies a story older than empires, older than myths, older even than memory. This isn't where civilization began. It's where it restarted. The Sumerians said so themselves. Eridu was the first city, the first temple, the first throne. According to the Sumerian king list, after the kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu. Not Ur, not Uruk, not Babylon. Eridu. A name that echoes like thunder through the earliest clay tablets ever pressed by human hands. But it didn't rise with a whimper. It arrived fully formed. Eridu didn't grow, it was placed. Like someone rolled out a divine carpet and said, "Start here." That alone is suspicious. But it gets weirder. The earliest levels of Eridu date back to at least 5,400 BCE, maybe earlier. Beneath its crumbling ziggurats and half-erased walls lies evidence of 17 layers of temple construction on top of the other built in the exact same spot, each layer more complex, more refined. As if someone was desperately trying to reconstruct something they could no longer remember clearly. A memory made of mud brick. layered like trauma. But why rebuild the same temple 17 times? Why not start fresh? Because they weren't trying to innovate. They were trying to remember. To get it right. The central structure was the Abzu, the house of the deep water temple of Enki, god of wisdom, magic, and underground rivers. Enki wasn't just a deity, he was a keeper of secrets. The guardian of me, the sacred laws that governed everything from agriculture to architecture to moral codes. And in the mythologies, Enki didn't write these laws. He rescued them. From the flood, from the dark, from whatever came before. Which raises a terrible question. What kind of knowledge needs rescuing? Eridu's sacredness wasn't in its size or splendor. It wasn't built to dominate. It was built to preserve, to safeguard something fragile, something dangerous, something holy. Like the schematic of a lost world. Let's talk about the Abzu. In Sumerian cosmology, the Abzu was the primeval sea beneath the earth, the source of all fresh water and wisdom. Enki's temple at Eridu was said to sit on top of the literal entrance to this underworld sea. Rituals there weren't just prayers, they were activations, attempts to connect with the deep. That's not religion. That's interface. Scholars often interpret the Abzu as a symbol. But what if it wasn't? What if the temple was built to access something real? An underground water source, yes, but also a frequency, a resonance. A library stored in stone and vibration. Think about it. Why build 17 temples in the exact same place? Why keep returning to this spot? Unless something was there. Unless they were trying to reactivate it. Now let's look at what came next. The cities that followed Ur, Lagash, Kish, Nippurul borrowed from Eridu's blueprint. Religious centers surrounded by concentric layers of administrative buildings, marketplaces, and homes. All aligned with the stars. All designed to reflect cosmic order. But none of them dared claim the title of first. They all remembered Eridu. Because Eridu wasn't just a city. It was a myth in real time. A relic of a civilization that had survived the unthinkable. We've seen this before. In the burial of Göbekli Tepe, in the flood myths of Sumer, in the echoing lines of Plato's Atlantis, the pattern is always the same. Something great rises. Something terrible happens. Survivors rebuild not from scratch, but from memory. And Eridu is the clearest example we have. A post-cataclysmic capital. A knowledge bunker. A temple built not for the living, but for the future. And what's buried in its layers? Artifacts that shouldn't be there, tools that suggest metallurgy, pottery with iconography that doesn't match any known local traditions, symbolism that echoes across continents. Serpents, circles, stars. The same motifs found in India, in Egypt, in Peru. How? How does the same symbolic language show up in cultures allegedly separated by thousands of miles and millennia? Unless they weren't separate. Unless they were descendants of something shared. Something centralized. Something like Eridu. Because the Sumerians didn't say they built civilization. They said they revived it. That kingship descended from heaven again. That cities rose again. That knowledge returned not spontaneously, but through inheritance. And if Eridu was the delivery point, then what came before it? What catastrophe shattered the original civilization so thoroughly that only fragments could be passed down? Was it the Younger Dryas impact? A solar flare? A war? We don't know. But Eridu is the scar tissue. The healed wound. The place where the survivors put their hands back in the clay and said, "Start again." It wasn't about innovation. It was about salvage. Preserving enough to matter, forgetting enough to survive. And maybe that's why Eridu feels so haunting. Because it's not just the first city. It's the last memory. The final whisper of a world that died so that ours could begin. But Eridu wasn't alone. Just up the river, another city rose less sacred, more administrative, but no less mysterious. A city where the gods met in council, where the calendar began, where power took root in the soil of myth. Its name was Nippur. Nippur. There is a silence that lingers in ruins, a kind of pressure in the air like the ghost of attention, the memory of something watching. In Nippur, that silence isn't empty. It's waiting. Because Nippur wasn't just a city, it was the city. Not the largest, not the richest, but the most sacred. If Eridu was the beginning of memory, Nippur was where that memory was made official, where the myths were refined into scripture, where the wild power of origin was brought into line, stamped in clay, and sealed with the authority of the gods. But not all the gods. Just one. Enlil, the Storm Lord, the king of heaven and earth, the one who destined kingship and held the tablets of destiny, cosmic hard drives that encoded the structure of the universe. In Sumerian mythology, Enlil didn't just command wind and weather, he decided fate, and his house, the Ekur, literally mountain house, was at the center of Nippur. Built like a ziggurat, but older than most of them, the Ekur was more than a temple. It was a divine courtroom, a meeting place for gods, a cosmic embassy between the mortal and the eternal. And what did they meet to discuss? The fate of humanity. Let's start there. Nippur was the seat of celestial legislation. Before kings could rule anywhere in Mesopotamia, they had to be recognized by Nippur's priests. Not just politically, but cosmically. No coronation counted unless Nippur said so. It was the Vatican and the Pentagon rolled into one, and its power didn't come from armies or gold. It came from memory, because Nippur was where the calendar was born. The Sumerians, like many ancient cultures, tracked time through the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, but they did more than observe, they calculated, with terrifying accuracy, lunar eclipses, solstices, the precession of the equinoxes, all tracked, all logged, all calibrated. And it all centered on Nippur. The priests here weren't just spiritual leaders, they were mathematicians, astronomers, timekeepers, time lords. Let's unpack that. The Sumerian calendar was lunisolar 12 months, adjusted periodically with an intercalary month to keep the seasons aligned. Sounds simple? It's not. It requires advanced observation, mathematical modeling, and a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. The kind of system you build when you're not trying to figure things out, but trying to preserve what you already know. In other words, inheritance again. And what about the layout? Like other Sumerian cities, Nippur was built around a central ziggurat, aligned with the cardinal points and likely the stars. But beneath the city, excavations have revealed levels of construction that predate the known city by thousands of years. Foundations that don't match the rest of the architecture. Walls of unknown origin. And fragment pottery, tools, stone tablets that suggest a culture more advanced than its supposed time. Some archaeologists whisper about a ghost layer, a pre-Sumerian stratum that doesn't belong. That shouldn't exist. But it does. Because Nippur, like Eridu, was not built once. It was built over, again and again, temple over temple, sanctuary over sanctuary, memory over memory, a ziggurat of forgetting. And yet, something always leaks through. Let's talk texts. Nippur was the birthplace of many of the Sumerian myths that we know today. It's where the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, was first compiled, where the Sumerian king list was likely edited, where the myth of Enlil's decision to flood the world was first etched into clay. You see a pattern? The flood. Again. Always the flood. In the myths, Enlil is the one who decides humanity must be destroyed. He finds us noisy, rebellious, dangerous, and so He sends the deluge. But it's not just a tantrum. It's a reset. A forced formatting of the hard drive. And the survivors? They are not spared at random. They are selected. In the Eridu Genesis, another text preserved in Nippur figure named Ziusudra is warned by Enki, Enlil's more sympathetic brother. He builds a boat, survives, rebuilds. You know the story. But the key detail is that the knowledge was saved, not the people. The memory, the calendar, the law, the rhythm. That's what mattered. Nippur wasn't just sacred, it was a server farm, a temple that backed up the cosmic operating system after the flood wiped the mainframe. And here's where it gets dark. Because Nippur was also the center of a quiet war. Not one fought with swords but with symbols. Enlil and Enki. Order and chaos. Authority and freedom. The myths tell of divine conflicts, exiles, rival temples, a civil war among gods that played out in ritual, in song, in architecture. What if that wasn't fiction? What if it was memory? What if Nippur and Eridu weren't just religious centers but opposing nodes of an ancient philosophical split? Enlil demanded submission. Enki offered knowledge. One flooded the world. The other saved it. And we, the descendants, have been living in the fallout ever since. Because the myths encoded in Nippur didn't fade. They spread to Akkad, to Babylon, to Canaan, Egypt, Greece, changed names, changed faces, but the bones stayed the same. Creation, rebellion, flood, rescue, reset, over and over again. And maybe Nippur wasn't just a city. Maybe it was a firewall, a safeguard built after the last cataclysm, designed to manage the next. But whatever it was, it didn't last. The memory frayed, the symbols blurred, and eventually, Nippur faded into ruins. But not before it passed the torch, to a place across the ocean. A city with no name, no king, no writing, only stone, only silence, only scale. Its name is Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan, pre-classical Mesoamerica. Teotihuacan doesn't whisper history. It stands there hulking, angular, and deathly silent like a monument carved by something that knew too much. Its pyramids loom across the Valley of Mexico like fossilized thunder, vast enough to baffle, precise enough to unnerve. Tourists shuffle up the Avenue of the Dead with cameras and sunscreen, but they have no idea. Because Teotihuacan is not what it seems. It's not Aztec, not Maya, not Olmec. When the Aztecs arrived in the valley centuries after it was already abandoned, they didn't claim it. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. That's not a title you give a suburb. That's reverence. That's terror. Because when they found it, the city was already a skeleton, already dead, already covered in centuries of moss, myth, and stone silence. No one remembered who built it. No one remembered why. But everyone agreed. It wasn't human. Not entirely. Let's look at the raw numbers. At its height, around 100 CE, Teotihuacan was the sixth largest city on Earth. Over 125,000 people. A sprawling metropolis of rigid geometry and cosmic alignment. The entire city was built on a north-south grid, with the main Avenue of the Dead aligned 15.5 degrees east of true north, possibly to point directly at the setting of the Pleiades. Or maybe to match the motion of the sun on a specific date. Or maybe to do something we still don't understand. That's the pattern, right? We don't understand. Not the layout. Not the timeline. Not the builders. Because they're gone. Completely. No names, no signatures, no king lists or cuneiform, just ruins and riddles. Start with the pyramids. The Pyramid of the Sun stands 216 feet tall and was once covered in a layer of gleaming white plaster that reflected the sun like a signal. Beneath it lies a cavern natural, modified, mysterious. Some think it represents the underworld. Others think it's a womb, a tunnel to a lost technology, a relic of something older. There's even a central shaft beneath the pyramida, vertical passage drilled deep into the bedrock. Why? No one knows. But it suggests vertical energy movement, resonance, an axis. The Pyramid of the Moon, at the north end of the Avenue of the Dead, is equally strange. It mimics the shape of the Cerro Gordo mountain behind it, deliberately, symbolically, cosmically. The pyramid wasn't just built on the earth, it was built to mirror the earth. Or maybe what came before it. Then there's the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, also known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. This structure is the most lavishly decorated of the three major pyramids. Its facade is covered with dozens of stylized serpent heads and intricate iconography, many of which seem to reference water, fire, and motion. Beneath it, archaeologists found a tunnel filled with mercury. Yes, mercury. Pools of it, sealed chambers, liquid metal glimmering in the dark. Mercury is toxic, dangerous, but also symbolic. It was believed to be a portal material, a medium between worlds. In ancient China and India, mercury was associated with immortality. In alchemy, it was a sacred element. In Teotihuacan, we don't know. Because the texts are gone, or never existed. What we have is architecture. And that's where the screams are. Because the whole city is coded. Not just aesthetically, mathematically, astronomically. Many researchers have pointed out that the layout of Teotihuacan reflects the solar system. The distances between the pyramids match the relative distances between planets. The Pyramid of the Sun sits at the center. The Pyramid of the Moon, offset, reflects the Earth's position. The entire city becomes a model not just of the heavens, but of movement, of orbital mechanics. In stone, 2,000 years ago. Without telescopes, without computers. Unless that wasn't when it was built. Let's go deeper. Because some believe the dating is wrong. That Teotihuacan was built much earlier than 100 BCE. That it predates the Toltecs, the Zapotecs, even the Olmecs. That it could stretch back to 2000 BCE or beyond. The problem is the same as always, lack of organic material. Radiocarbon dating of the structures is almost impossible. So we date around them based on pottery, nearby burials, or artistic styles. But what if the core was already ancient when the first potters showed up? What if they inherited it? And here's the thing, the core structures are megalithic. Not adobe, not brick, stone, fitted, angular, designed for durability. The kind of durability you'd want if you were trying to preserve knowledge, or power, or memory. Some theorists believe Teotihuacan wasn't a city at all, but a machine, a resonant engine, a geoelectrical node in a forgotten grid of planetary harmonics. They point to the use of mica, rare mineral, with insulating properties found in buried chambers, to the magnetic anomalies, to the tunnels beneath the pyramids, to the alignment with solar zenith points. They suggest it wasn't built to live in. It was built to use. As what? A transmitter? A beacon? A factory? We don't know, but we feel it. Walk through the Avenue of the Dead at dusk, and the shadows stretch too far. Stand atop the Pyramid of the Sun at noon, and the wind doesn't just blow, it hums. There's something in the stone, in the silence. Something held. The Aztecs believed it was a place where gods were born. Maybe that's true. Or maybe it's where gods died and left their tools behind. Because Teotihuacan doesn't answer questions. It asks them. It throws a wrench into the carefully engineered timeline of New World archaeology. It says, "Someone was here, someone who knew more than they should have, someone who didn't need writing because they had geometry, they had stone." And if that's true, then what came before it? Who taught the builders? Where did they go? Some believe they moved south, that they scattered, like seeds in the wind, and that their next incarnation wasn't in the highlands but in the desert, where the oldest city in the Americas sleeps beneath layers of sand, memory, and bone. Its name is Caral Supe, Peru. It looks like nothing. Just wind-blown stones and sun-bleached terraces on a parched patch of coastal desert 200 kilometers north of Lima. No grand pyramids, no golden idols, no war gods glaring from temple walls. But that's the trick. Caral doesn't scream. It whispers. And in that whisper is the oldest city in the Americas. Welcome to Caral Supe. Dated to at least 2600 BCE and, possibly older. Caral is older than the Egyptian pyramids, older than the Indus Valley, older than Babylon. It rises like a mirage from the Soup Valley, a perfectly preserved urban complex that rewrites the history of the New World every time we dare to look closer. But what makes Caral truly terrifying isn't its age. It's what's missing. No weapons. No walls. No graves full of warrior elites. This wasn't a city of conquest. It was a city of order. And that makes it even more suspicious. Because Caral doesn't fit the model, the textbook model, the one where agriculture leads to hierarchy, hierarchy leads to conflict, and conflict builds walls and empires. But Caral skipped that. It had none of the defensive features we expect from early civilizations. Instead, it had pyramids, plazas, sunken amphitheaters, and irrigation canals, not one or two, dozens, laid out with mathematical precision, aligned to the stars. A city that didn't evolve, it appeared. Planned, measured, remembered. Let's start with the scale. The Caral complex covers more than 150 acres and includes at least 6 massive pyramidal structures. The largest, known as the Great Pyramid, rises more than 90 feet, built not from crude stone, but finely layered terraces of earth and ash. The pyramid was designed to withstand earthquakes. Yes, designed. Think about that. A Stone Age society, with no known metallurgy or wheels, creating seismic-resistant architecture in a high-risk earthquake zone. That's not improvisation, that's engineering. But where did the knowledge come from? Caral's builders left behind no written records. But they left ropes, or rather quippus, knotted cords, used by the Inca 1,000 years later. Here at Caral, we find their ancestors, or maybe their instructors. Knotted cords buried alongside children, stored in ceremonial spaces, strung across altars. Communication without writing. Computation without numerals. Data encoded in threads, like a Stone Age hard drive. And then there's the music. Flutes made from condor bones, cornets crafted from deer and llama, not hidden in homes or scattered in dumps, but placed with reverence in temples and ceremonial platforms. This was not a people learning how to build a city. This was a people who already knew, and their knowledge went beyond sound. It reached the stars. Caral's city layout appears astronomically aligned. Certain structures mark solstices and equinoxes. Others point to celestial events we're still decoding. The sunken circular plazas were likely designed for ceremonial sound and sky-watching amphitheaters of observation. Now ask yourself, who needs a cosmic calendar? A farmer? A priest? Or a survivor? Because what if Caral isn't the beginning? What if it's the middle? What if its calmness, its absence of war, is not innocence but memory? What if these people remembered what came before? What was lost? and decided never to repeat it? Because the silence in Carol is not peaceful. It's loaded. There are no idols, no written doctrine, no god-kings lording over the masses. Just shared space, open plazas, and pyramids not for burials but for gatherings. That's not religion. That's ritual memory. And here's the part that no one talks about. The people of Carol vanished. Not in war. Not in fire. They just left. The city was abandoned around 1800 BCE, its structures slowly swallowed by time and sand. No sign of famine, no evidence of plague, just absence. Like a decision, like the last note of a song that only a few knew how to hear. But fragments remained. Their influence stretches across the Andes, rippling into later civilizations like the Chavin, the Moche, the Inca, but always diminished, always echoing something greater. Because Carol didn't fade, it was dismantled, taken apart not to be destroyed but to be remembered. And its builders? They didn't start from scratch. They arrived with geometry in their bones, with instruments in their hands, with the sky in their hearts, and maybe with stories of a flood they never wanted to repeat. Because that's the thread that runs through every pre-flood civilization. Atlantis, Lemuria, Rama, Eridu, Teotihuacan, Carol. They didn't rise from nothing. They rose from ashes. They built not to begin, but to begin again. And Carol, in its eerie silence, might be the loudest scream of all. But across the sea, halfway around the world, another legend stirs. In the rainforests of Southeast Asia and the jungles of India, a kingdom ruled not by men, but by serpents, and not in memory, but in myth. Naga civilization, India, Southeast Asia. They slither between myth and memory, between scripture and speculation. They are never fully visible, only hinted at in coils and curves, in the undulations of temple carvings and the whispered fear in ancient texts. The Nagas, half human, half serpent, deities, demons, saviors, destroyers. Their civilization, if you can call it that, doesn't leave behind cities in the conventional sense. No ziggurats, no stone colossi, no roads, only portals, gateways to another world, one underground, underwater, or somewhere else entirely. But here's what keeps surfacing. The Nagas weren't just characters in stories. They ruled. They built. And somewhere beneath the sediment of symbolic language lies the spine of a lost civilization, a pre-flood empire, erased not by time, but by intent. Let's start with the Vedas and the Puranas, ancient Indian texts written in Sanskrit that don't just describe gods and heroes, but entire planetary systems, technologies, and wars. The Nagas appear again and again, guardians of treasure, lords of Padalathe underworld, possessors of immense wisdom and terrifying power. But it's not just literature, it's geography. Many regions across India and Southeast Asia still bear their name: Nagaland, Nagpur, Nagarjunakonda, and more. Not poetic coincidence, legacy, echoes of real presence. Names carried forward by descendants who only half understood who or what those names originally described. In Hindu tradition, the Nagas are deeply entwined with cosmic cycles. They are not just snake people. They are keepers of knowledge, guardians of the sacred. And in some versions, they are the builders of cities deep beneath the earth, cities with shining walls, infinite tunnels, and technologies so advanced they are mistaken for magic. Let's go there. To Patala. According to Hindu cosmology, Patala is one of the 7 netherworlds layered beneath the earth. But unlike the hells of Western myth, Patala isn't a realm of fire and punishment. It's beautiful, lush, lit by its own sun, flowing with rivers, palaces of crystal and metal, towers that gleam in a light that doesn't come from the sky. And who lives there? The Nagas. Described in excruciating detail in the Bhagavata Purana, they are sophisticated beings. Some are humanoid with serpentine features. Others are full-bodied serpents with immense intelligence. They live in highly organized societies with kings, queens, warriors, and scholars. Their capital, Bhogavati, is described as a place of impossible architecture and interdimensional portals. So again, the question: myth or memory? Because every culture around India has a serpent people myth. In Cambodia and Laos, the Nagas are seen as ancestors. In Thailand, they are protectors of temples. In Java and Bali, their likeness is carved into nearly every ancient shrine. And in all these myths, the serpent beings aren't evil. They are older. Let's pivot to archaeology. In Cambodia's Angkor Wat complex, the most iconic feature isn't just the towering temple spire sits, the causeways guarded by Naga balustrades, seven-headed serpent railings that guide visitors into the sacred core. The symbolism is thick, but the execution is engineering. Giant sandstone serpents carved with perfect symmetry, woven into the infrastructure of the temple itself. Why serpents? Why not lions, elephants, deified ancestors? Because the Nagas weren't just symbols. They were remembered. And what were they guarding? Something old. Older than Angkor. Older than Hinduism. Let's turn the page to Indian temples. In South India, particularly in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, there are underground serpent shrines Sarpakavu worshipped with a kind of nervous reverence, not for prosperity, not for peace, but for containment. The belief isn't that the Nagas need us. It's that they allow us to live here, that they hold back forces beneath the earth, forces they understand, and we don't. Which leads us to the next thread. The Nagas didn't just live underground. They came from somewhere. In many texts, they arrive in flying palaces, vimanas. Yes, again with the flying machines. Some vimanas are described as fiery discs, others as palaces that could shrink or grow at will. The Nagas had access to these, or built them. In some versions of the Mahabharata, a Naga prince named Takshaka commands fleets of airships. He leads invasions. He decimates cities. He disappears. Not because he was defeated, but because he retreated. Back into the deep. Back into the earth. Back into memory. And that's the most disturbing part. The idea that the Nagas didn't die. They withdrew. Their civilization didn't collapse. It recoiled. Like a serpent waiting to strike again, or, more chillingly, watching us fail again. Some modern interpretations suggest the Nagas represent an ancient Racian offshoot of early humans or non-human intelligence that went subterranean before the last cataclysm. They didn't try to rebuild on the surface. They didn't broadcast their survival. They just waited. Preserved their tech. Preserved their genome. Preserved their knowledge. Not to share. To inherit. When we're gone. That's the thread that ties them to Agartha, to Shambhala, to the subterranean sanctuaries buried beneath every continent. Because maybe the Nagas weren't a one-off. Maybe they were the remnant. Maybe all these pre-flood civilizations we've discussed, Atlantis, Lemuria, Rama, Eridu, Carol, didn't vanish. They diverged. Some built stone. Some built code. Some built myth. But the Nagas? They built below. And now, in the cracks of the earthen, the tectonic sighs and the underground hums, we might still be hearing them. Not calling. Just listening. Waiting. And if they are, then maybe the next civilization doesn't rise from us. Maybe it slithers up. And that brings us to a stranger tale still. One where life and death aren't opposites. Where the gatekeeper of the underworld is not a demon, but a judge. His name is Yama, and his kingdom might be the first civilization ever judged. Yama's kingdom, Hindu mythology. Before Abraham, before Osiris, before the concept of a hell was codified in scripture or stone, there was Yama, the god of death, but not the reaper. The king. In Hindu mythology, Yama isn't just a collector of souls, he's a sovereign, a judge, an administrator of cosmic order. And his kingdom, Yamaloka, or Narakais, not a realm of eternal punishment, but a kind of spiritual processing center, a metaphysical courthouse where the dead are measured and their fate is assigned. But here's the strange part. It's not just a spiritual concept. Yama's kingdom is described geographically. And what's described doesn't feel like a dream. It feels like a civilization, one that existed before death. Let's walk the edge of theology and archaeology. In the Vedic texts particularly, the Rigveda and the Garuda Purana, Yama is described as the first mortal to die, the first being to cross the threshold. But he doesn't just die, he rules. He becomes the guide, the monarch of a realm beyond human perception. And that realm? It's structured. Cities, palaces, roads, halls, judges, record keepers, devices that scan karma, rivers that dissolve sin. It's not a cloudscape. It's not ethereal nonsense. It's a bureaucracy. A civilization made of consequence. But what if that's not just metaphor? What if Yama's kingdom was not invented to scare children or soothe mourners? What if it was remembered? From before the flood. From before, memory turned to myth. Because every time we scratch the surface of Yama's legend, we find echoes of something real. Let's talk geography. Yama's realm is said to be south of Earth. Always south. In Hindu cosmology, south is the direction of death. Funerals face south. Offerings to ancestors are made while facing south. It's not arbitrary, it's coded. But it's also specific. Yama city, called Sanyamana, is described in some texts as lying deep underground, surrounded by walls of iron and fire. Souls reach it via Vaitarani, a blood-red river full of filth and knives. But once across, they enter a city of perfect order. Not paradise, not torment, order. Think about that. Underground, fortified, technologically advanced, filled with complex, moral and energetic systems. That's not hell. That's an archive, a processing center. Or maybe, if you squint, a data vault. And who works there? Not demons, beings, clerks of karma, scribes, executioners, surgeons of the soul. They use tools, scanners, scales, all described in terrifying detail. And what does Yama sit on? A throne of judgment, surrounded by Chitragupta, the divine record keeper, who tracks every thought, word, and deed of the living. That's not fantasy. That's infrastructure. So where did this come from? How did a prehistoric culture imagine a death realm so structured, so judicial, so eerily familiar? Unless they didn't imagine it. Unless they remembered it. Some scholars and mystics argue that Yama's kingdom wasn't a place you go after death, but a place that existed. That in some prehistoric epoch long before recorded history, there was a city or society so obsessed with morality, so technologically advanced, that it developed a literal system for processing souls. Not metaphorically. Literally. A soul-sorting machine. A judgment engine. And after the flood, after the fires, after the great amnesia, all that remained were the fragments. The stories. The symbols. And Yama. Let's talk tech. The Vedas describe Chitragupta's Tabelta device, upon which every human's deeds are recorded in real time, not after death, during life. Sound like divine magic? Or Surveillance? Remote data tracking? Biometric record keeping? It raises a horrifying question. What if someone is keeping track? What if, long ago, a civilization built the tech to monitor the soul, to measure behavior, thought, intent, and then, when the world burned, that tech was buried, mythologized, and named Yamaloka? The kingdom didn't die. It just changed frequency. Because Yama isn't feared, he's respected. He's called Dharma Rajaking of righteousness. And some traditions suggest he returns periodically. To recalibrate. To reboot. To judge not just individuals but eras. And maybe we're due. Because Yama's kingdom isn't just a place where the dead go. It's a model. A blueprint. For what comes after collapse. A system designed to outlast memory. To guide what survives. Because if you want to rebuild the world after a flood, a fire, or a fall, you don't start with stones. You start with ethics. And if you can automate that, you're not building a city, you're building Civilization 2.0, and maybe that's what Yama did. And maybe that's what we're standing on. A system that still runs, even if we can't see the code. But if Yama's kingdom was a reset engine, a soul server, a moral mainframe, then maybe it wasn't the only one. Because halfway across the world, a different myth tells of 7 cities. Glowing, silent, lost, buried not beneath sand or ice, but beneath greed. The 7 cities of Cibola. The 7 cities of Cibola. Somewhere in the deserts of the American Southwest beneath, dunes, cliffs, or perhaps a veil of time there, are said to be 7 cities. Cities of gold, cities of light, cities of secrets. They shimmer in the heat haze of legend, passed down by conquistadors and native oral traditions alike. To European ears, they sounded like greed, El Dorado's fraternal twin, a myth made of metal and mirage. But what if the gold was never literal? What if Cibola wasn't about riches? What if it was about remnants? Because the story of the 7 cities of Cibola doesn't begin with Spanish lust. It begins with loss. Let's rewind. The earliest references to these cities come not from explorers, but from survivors. Moorish slaves, shipwrecked monks, and native guides each spinning tales, not of treasure, but of otherness. Cities where the architecture didn't match the land, where lights glowed at night, where tools moved without hands, where knowledge was kept under lock and memory. By the time Francisco Vázquez de Coronado heard these tales in the 1540s, they had mutated into gold lust dreams. He followed them north from Mexico into what is now New Mexico and Arizona, expecting palaces. He found pueblos, adobe homes, stone towns, and he went mad with disappointment. But what if he wasn't entirely wrong? What if what he saw were the descendants of something older? Not gold cities, ghost cities. Ruins built atop ruins, names changed, purposes forgotten, but the bonestha design remained. Because indigenous oral traditions don't talk about 7 cities of greed, they talk about 7 cities of origin. The Zuni, the Hopi, the Navajo have stories of emergence from underground, from distant lands, from cities that no longer exist in this world but did once. They speak of Sisyphus portals, of star beings who taught them agriculture, mathematics, and law, of a time before the flood, before the fire, before us. And those 7 cities? They weren't just shelters. They were archives. Let's get topographical. Some researchers have noted that several ancient settlements in the American Southwest, such as Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and the structures at Bandelier, share strange similarities: solar alignment, acoustic properties, and underground chambers, known as kivas, which were used for ritual and, possibly, communication. What kind of communication? We don't know. But the Hopi say the Kachina spirit messenger Sansei emerged from those places. And they brought messages from the stars. Kachinas are often dismissed as costume dancers in seasonal ceremonies, but in Hopi tradition, they are being hybrids, teachers, watchers. Their headdresses are not decorative, they are functional. Their stories do not end in metaphor. They begin in memory, and in that memory, the world has ended before. The Hopi speak of not one, but 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by imbalance: fire, ice, flood, civilization rising, falling, and resetting, but not wiped clean. Always, a few survive, a few remember, and they go north, to the cities. 7 of them. Cities that hold the blueprint, not just of survival but of rebuilding. Now let's shift to architecture. The great houses of Chaco Canyon were not improvised shelters. They were astronomically aligned, multi-story complexes made from precisely cut sandstone blocks, timber brought from over 70 miles away, rooms aligned with solstices and equinoxes, windows designed to capture specific celestial events. This was not trial and error. This was instruction. And beneath the surface, tunnels. Some filled in, some still open. Leading where? No one knows. But the locals whisper of entrances to something deeper. To cities not seen since the last sun. And the gold? Ah, yes, the gold. Maybe there was some. But maybe the gold was never metal. Maybe it was knowledge. The kind of knowledge that gets buried when the world burns. The kind of knowledge that doesn't survive conquest. The kind that is remembered only in lullabies, dances, and ruins that don't quite make sense. Like the Sipapu, a hole in the floor of every kiva, said to be the portal from which the ancestors emerged. But perhaps it wasn't from the earth. Perhaps it was from below the floodline. From the cities that came before. 7 of them. Each holding a part of the code, the pattern, the structure of a civilization not yet remembered, but never quite lost. And maybe, just maybe, Cibola wasn't a destination. It was a system. A backup plan. A distributed vault for a dying age. 7 nodes, 7 frequencies, 7 chances to get it right next time. And here we are. Again. Standing at the edge of the next fall, still looking for gold, still ignoring the message, because the 7 cities weren't hoarding treasure. They were guarding memory. And what happens when that memory is unlocked? Maybe we're not meant to know. Yet. But while Cibola vanished into the dust of history, another city was pulled into the sea. A real one. Visible today. A city tied to gods, war, and submergence. Dwarka, the sunken cities of Dwarka, India. There is a sound the ocean makes when it swallows memory. It's not violent, not theatrical, just an ancient hush, like a secret being sealed. That's the sound off the western coast of India, where divers once went looking for coral reefs and found cities. Not coral, not rock. Cities. Welcome to Dwarkath Gateway between history and myth, between scripture and stone. According to Indian mythology, Dwarka was the city of Krishna, not just a spiritual teacher or a god figure, but a king, a strategist, a warrior, a man who ruled over a city so vast, so splendid, that its palaces shone with gems and its streets echoed with chariots drawn by white horses and artificial elephants. And then it was gone, submerged by the sea. Not as punishment, as prophecy. For thousands of years, Dwarka lived only in sacred texts, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavata, Purana, the Harivamsa. In these epics, it was described with surreal detail, a city with 900,000 palaces, wide boulevards, moats with drawbridges, and a harbor bustling with sea trade. The skeptics shrugged. Myth, allegory, political fan fiction from ancient priests. And then, in 2001, the Arabian Sea cleared its throat. Using sonar and marine archaeology tools, the National Institute of Ocean Technology, NIOT, discovered massive geometrical structures beneath the Gulf of Cambe, nearly 40 meters below the surface, miles offshore. Astonishment followed, then silence. Because what they found broke the script. Regular formations, gridded streets, rectangular structures, pillars, a network spread across 9 kilometers, not random debris, urban planning. Carbon, dating from a piece of wood, pulled from the site yielded an age of approximately 7,500 BCE. Let that sit. 7,500 years before Christ. Before Egypt. Before Sumer. Before what we call civilization. If that dating is accurate and it remains controversial, it makes the underwater city of Dwarka the oldest known urban structure on Earth. But even if it's not that old, even if the dating is off by a few millennia, the implications remain catastrophic. Because we're still looking at a sunken city where there shouldn't be one. We're still staring at geometry where only chaos was expected. And that geometry matches descriptions in scripture word for word. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka as built by Vishwakarma, the architect of the gods, a city of impossible beauty, erected in a single day, a city Krishna later abandoned, knowing it was fated to drown. And drown it did. As the sea roared in, Krishna walked away, into the forest, and was never seen again. Myth? Maybe. But now we have sonar. Now we have submersibles. And the ocean doesn't lie. Let's talk construction. Marine archaeologists found structures made of basalt and other stone not native to the seafloor. Rectilinear formations that do not occur naturally. Stone blocks stacked in patterns, what looks like staircases. Foundations, not nature. Design. They also found artifacts, pottery shards, beads, fossilized bones, and the telltale signs of fire. Fire. At the bottom of the ocean. What burns underwater? Only memory. Only myth. Only cities that weren't supposed to exist. But Dwarka did exist. And not just in one place. Multiple sites. Off the coast of Gujarat, modern-day Dwarka and Bet Dwarka have revealed submerged temples, walls, and jetties. Structures that align with the sun and stars. Structures that fit ancient blueprints found not in engineering manuals, but in Sanskrit. And here's the wild part. The modern city of Dwarka was built atop ruins. Those ruins were built atop older ruins. And those? Who knows? This isn't a city. It's a palimpsest. A layered memory. A rebirth machine. Each layer built with reverence for the one before. And the sea? It waits. Because Dwarka is not alone. India's coastlines are littered with hints Pumpuhar in Tamil Nadu, Mahabalipuram near Chennai, and Morosites, where the land gives way to myth, and myth gives way to stone. And all of them? Sunken. As if the sea knows what we're not ready to remember. Let's ask a question no one dares. What if the flood myths are all describing the same event? Atlantis, Lemuria, Eridu, Dwarka. What if the reason these civilizations all end the same way, fire, flood, phallus, because it happened? And what if Dwarka isn't just a city? What if it's evidence, not of divine magic, but of pre-flood engineering, of knowledge older than the Himalayas, of cultures so attuned to the cycles of Earth that they built in sync with Eton still lost? And what about Krishna? If you strip the blue skin and godhood, what are you left with? A leader, a strategist, a war general, A man who fought battles not just with arrows and chariots but with something more. In the Mahabharata, Krishna helps deploy weapons that sound eerily modern. Missiles, beams of light, projectiles that cause mass destruction. Sound familiar? We've heard these echoes in the Rama Empire. We've seen the scorched earth at Mohenjo-daro. So, maybe Krishna wasn't a god. Maybe he was a remnant. A descendant of a civilization clinging to order in the last days before the sea claimed everything. And when he saw the end coming, he walked away. Let it fall, because maybe some things are meant to be buried, not to punish us, to preserve us. Dwarka drowned, but it didn't die. It waits. And in its silence lies a warning. One we've heard before. One we're still ignoring. Because the ocean has one rule. Everything returns. But in the Pacific, on the other side of the world, another mystery stirs beneath the waves. Not in Sanskrit. In silence. Yonaguni. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. The sea doesn't forget. It smooths, it silences, but it never forgets. Off the coast of Japan's westernmost island Yonaguni there is a monument so massive, so precise, and so inexplicable that it forced the ocean to start whispering. Some say it's a natural formation, a trick of geology and current. Others swear it's proof of an ancient civilization lost beneath the waves. A city, a shrine, a warning. What everyone agrees on, it doesn't belong. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver looking for hammerhead sharks, the Yonaguni Monument is a submerged stone structure that sits about 25 meters below the surface of the East China Sea. It measures over 150 meters long and 40 meters wide and nearly half the size of a football field. Its sides are terraced with right angles, its surfaces are flat and smooth, and its lines are too clean. Imagine a ziggurat. Now drown it. Now try to explain why it has staircases, platforms, and ramps. This is not natural erosion. Not the way we're used to thinking about erosion. The main feature is stepped, pyramid-like mass has, flat planes intersecting at right angles, vertical walls that rise with unnatural precision, and terraces that look suspiciously man-made. Some resemble the kind of stone-cut architecture seen in Peru's Sacsayhuaman or Egypt's Osirioon. But this? It's underwater. And it's deep. Too deep for a city that should have been built during the last few thousand years. The sea level here hasn't been that low since at least the end of the last ice age, somewhere around 10,000 BCE. And there it is again. That date, the red line of pre-flood memory. What if Yonaguni wasn't built before the flood? What if it was built during? To survive it? To record it? To stand against it? Let's talk features. Apart from the main structure, divers have found other anomalies. What looks like a large archway, roads, walls, channels. One slab even appears to be a massive megalithic face-carved eyes, nose, mouth weathered but unmistakable. If these features were found on land, no one would question their artificiality. But submerged in salt water, skeptics lean hard on geology. They call it a fluke, a happy accident of tectonics and erosion. But Japan's own Ministry of Education once listed it as a cultural asset. For something nature built? Number. Something we forgot. Enter Professor Masaaki Kimura. Marine geologist, maverick, villain to skeptics. Kimura has spent decades studying Yonaguni, measuring its angles, mapping its terraces, photographing its inscriptions. He believes it's a sunken city, a complex, possibly part of a much larger landmass that now lies beneath the East China Sea, stretching from Taiwan to Okinawa. And according to Kimura, the structures could be as much as 10,000 years old. Older than any known culture in East Asia, older than the Jomon pottery found across Japan, older than Sumer, Egypt, or Stonehenge. So who built it? No one knows. There is no known Japanese culture from that period capable of such construction. No writing, no tools, no myths at least none that survived. Except, in Okinawan and Ryukyuan folklore, there are whisperings of the lost people of the sea, builders who came from the east, who erected great stone places, who vanished when the waters rose. The legends don't name them, but they remember them. Fragments, ghosts, the same pattern we've seen in every corner of the world. A civilization that built in stone, that aligned with the stars, that watched the sea rise and tried to endure. What if Yonaguni was their final temple, their last message? Because the monument isn't just huge, it's oriented, aligned with magnetic north, structured in ratios that reflect the golden mean, and there are other submerged formations nearby, other hints, as if Yonaguni is the visible tip of something deeper, something vast, something erased. Let's talk tectonics. Japan is one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes. The Pacific Ring of Fire doesn't play games. What if the civilization that built Yonaguni knew this? What if they designed it not to stand forever but to signal forever? A monument so massive that even if the earth shattered, it would still stand. And now it lies in silence. But silence isn't the same as absence. The sea watches, the stone holds, and in its wet corridors, the past whispers. Of engineers without names. Of cities that watched the stars from beneath the waves. Of memory, encoded not in ink, but in angle. Because Yonaguni may be the final punctuation of a long-forgotten sentence. Civilization didn't start once. It started again, and again, and again, each time with less memory, less time, less mercy. And yet, each time someone left a mark. Not a story. A structure. The question now isn't, did a pre-flood civilization exist? The question is, which one? Because from Yonaguni to Egypt, from Peru to India, the echoes are not coincidence. They are cartography. A map drawn not with lines, but with ruins. And if you follow that map, it leads to a line of stone stretching across the Atlantic, to an underwater road, to the Bahamas, and the legend called Bimini, Bimini Road, Bahamas. Just beneath the turquoise shimmer of the Atlantic, off the coast of North Bimini in the Bahamas, lies a formation that shouldn't exist. It stretches in a near-perfect line across the seafloor massive, rectangular blocks of limestone, each one interlocked like the bones of a fossilized serpent, disappearing into the blue. Locals call it Bimini Road. Skeptics call it geology. But the sea doesn't lie. It just buries. Discovered in 1968, Bimini Road immediately ignited a firestorm. To the untrained eye, it looks like an ancient roadway, a breakwater, a wall, something built. The stones are uniformly cut. They fit together too tightly. They follow a strange, serpentine path almost, as if guiding the way to something just out of sight. And then, there's the timing. In 1938, 3 decades before the discoverer of psychic Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet claimed that remnants of Atlantis would rise near the Bahamas in 1968 or 1969. Lunacy? Coincidence? Or something more unsettling? Because Bimini isn't just weird. It's wrong. It doesn't belong. Let's talk geology. The official story says the blocks are beach rock, naturally occurring sediment formed by the cementation of sand and shell fragments over time. In theory, slabs like this can break apart in regular shapes due to natural fracturing. In theory. But here's what keeps researchers like Dr. Greg Little and others up at night. The stones are leveled, not haphazard, leveled. Many have flat tops and right angles. Some are stacked deliberately. Underwater sonar reveals that the formation continues beneath the sand. It's not just a path. It's a structure, part of something far larger, mostly buried, possibly ancient, and maybe the last whisper of a drowned world. Which brings us to the A word, Atlantis. Casey's predictions aside, Bimini has long been connected to Atlantis theories. Plato described Atlantis as lying beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it somewhere in the Atlantic. Mainstream historians roll their eyes, but the clues stack like stone. The Bimini Road sits on the edge of the Great Bahama Banca, massive underwater plateau with geological features that defy easy explanation. The platform stretches for hundreds of miles, with submerged ridges, drop-offs, and what appear to be unnatural cuts. If this was once above water as it would have been during the last ice age, Bimini Road may be the remnant of a coastal city, a seawall, a dock, a temple path, and when the waters rose, they didn't just drown the city. They erased the context. And that's the real issue with Bimini. It's not just about what's visible. It's about what's missing. No inscriptions. No artifacts. No tools. Just stone. But stone doesn't lie. Stone remembers. Stone remains. And here's the kicker. Limestone doesn't preserve human artifacts well. Organic material decays, clay disintegrates, wood vanishes, but the architecture that's eternal. That's what Bimini gives us. And what it hides? Let's talk alignment. Some researchers claim Bimini Road points directly toward Andros Island, where other anomalous underwater formations have been spotted. Others say it's part of a larger grid connecting submerged sites across the Atlantic, Cuba, the Azores, the Canaries. A lost map, a civilization not localized, but distributed. A network. And Bimini? It's the edge node, the warning buoy. Because the more we learn about Earth's ocean levels during the last ice age, the clearer it becomes. Vast stretches of what is now seabed were once coastal lands. In fact, if sea levels dropped by just 100 meters, entire cities would reappear. And what would we see? Stone. Paths. Silence. Exactly what we see at Bimini. Let's ask the dangerous question. What if Bimini Road wasn't built by humans? Not modern ones. Not Sumerians. Not Egyptians, but by the precursors, the pre-flood engineers, the culture whose remnants are scattered across timelines like static, the ones who built before Babel, before Atlantis, before we forgot what the stars meant. Maybe Bimini wasn't part of a city. Maybe it was a gate, a threshold, the last exit before the deluge. And when the waters came, they didn't destroy it. They sealed it, like a file marked, "Do not open." But the tide is turning. Sea levels are rising again. Sonar is better. Divers are bolder. And the stones are speaking. Slowly. One line at a time. Because Bimini isn't alone. It's part of a paterna submerged Rosetta Stone connecting cultures that we're never supposed to touch. And if we decode it, we don't just find Atlantis. We find what came before Atlantis. The supercontinent. The real one. The world beneath the waves that never had a name. Until now. Zealandia. The lost continent of Zealandia. It was there all along. Lurking beneath the South Pacific, hiding in plain sight. Too massive to be myth, but too drowned to matter until now. Zealandia isn't a theory. It's a continent. An actual, verified, geologically recognized continent. And the moment scientists confirmed its existence in 2017, it forced a very uncomfortable question into the daylight. How does an entire continent vanish from history? No legends, no maps, no memory. Just ocean and silence. Stretching nearly 5 million square kilometers, Zealandia is about 2/3 the size of Australia. 94% of it is submerged. What's above sea level today? Just the mountainous peaks of its highest ridges. New Zealand, New Caledonia, a few scattered islands. But once it was land, forests, rivers, possibly cities, possibly something more. Because here's the problem with Zealandia. It shouldn't be forgotten. It's too big, too significant. If it had ever been inhabited, the archaeological footprint would be massive. And yet, history doesn't mention it. No legends from Polynesia, no whispers from Asia, no echo in the mythologies of the sea, unless it was remembered differently. Let's talk about Lemuria, a once hypothesized landmass in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, invented in the 19th century to explain the spread of lemurs across distant islands. But soon it evolved no longer just a zoological placeholder, but a lost continent, a cradle of civilization, a place of ancient wisdom now drowned. Science dismissed it because it wasn't falsifiable. But then, 2017 happened. Zealandia surfaced not literally, but geologically, confirmed as Earth's 8th continent, broken off from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana tens of millions of years ago. But the timing gets fuzzy. When did it submerge? Some part scientists admit may have been above water as recently as 10,000 years ago. There it is again. 10,000 BCE. The scar line of history. The red thread that runs through Atlantis, through Göbekli Tepe, through Dwarka, through Bimini, and now through Zealandia. The question is no longer, was there land? It's, was there life? Let's look at the clues. New Zealand is home to some of the oldest and most unique species on Earth. Flightless birds, ancient trees, reptiles that haven't changed in hundreds of millions of years. It's a biological time capsule. And time capsules don't form in isolation. They survive in isolation. Which means they had company once. Which means the rest of Zealandia wasn't just jungle. It was home to something. And then gone. Swallowed not just by water, but by forgetting. Because when we talk about forgotten civilizations, we often imagine the erasure of records, of buildings, of tools. But the most dangerous erasure is the one that deletes context. What if Zealandia was Lemuria? Or part of it? A continent that once stretched from India to Easter Island. A network of cultures connected not by empire, but by water. An aquatic civilization, maritime, pan-Pacific. It would explain the megaliths of Nan Madol, the stone heads of Rapa Nui, the obsidian roads buried beneath the Solomon Sea, the oral traditions of the Maori, the Hawaiians, the Samoans, all of which speak of ancestors who came from vast lands that sank beneath the waves. Zealandia may not be Lemuria, but it is evidence. Evidence that the world is older, stranger, and more interrupted than we've ever been allowed to admit. Because the Pacific doesn't just hide islands. It hides time. And in that drowned time lies a possibility no one wants to face. That human history is not a line. It's a loop. Civilization doesn't rise once and fall once. It cycles. And in each cycle, a few remember. A few carve warnings into stone. A few disappear below the surface, geographically or culturally. And they wait. For the next loop. For the next fall. So what happened to Zealandia? Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just trees and birds and volcanoes. Or maybe it was a civilization so different from our own that we don't even recognize its fingerprints. Because not all knowledge is technological. Some is environmental, spatial, oceanic. The knowledge of tides, of currents, of fish migrations and star paths, and the resonance of stone underfoot. What if the civilization of Zealandia wasn't obsessed with building upward but outward? What if their monuments were made of water, sound, ritual? What if the clues are still out there buried beneath coral, encoded in carvings too weathered to read, echoed in mythologies dismissed as children's stories? Because if Zealandia really was once above water, and if someone lived there, and if they knew the flood was coming, they wouldn't build a city. They'd build a message. A system of whispers stretched across the ocean. A cultural submarine. And we are just now beginning to hear it. The pulse of a drowned heart. A pattern buried not in books, but in the bones of continents. Tartessos, ancient Spain. The story of Tartessos begins where most stories end, at the edge of the map, beyond the Pillars of Heracles. At the murky border between Mediterranean civilization and the wild, storm-churned Atlantic, between what the Greeks knew and what they feared. Tartessos was a name whispered by travelers, coveted by kings, and dismissed by historians. It was called a kingdom, a port, a city-state, a land of wealth beyond imagining. A place where silver ran through the earth like blood through veins, where the rivers sparkled with metal, and the rulers dined in gold. And then it vanished. Without war, without warning, without a trace. This is not legend. This is documented absence. And absence always has a shape. Let's rewind. The earliest references to Tartessos come from the 9th century BCE, when Greek and Phoenician traders began venturing west from the Mediterranean into the Iberian Peninsula. What they found stunned them. A people already there, already organized, already rich. They didn't discover Tartessos, they encountered it. And what they encountered was unlike anything they expected to find in the West. These people had writing, a form of semi-linear script that remains undeciphered to this day. They had metallurgy advanced smelting techniques for silver, tin, and gold. They had agriculture, irrigation, architecture, and trade routes. Lots of them. Tartessos became a crucial node in a Mediterranean network of trade that reached from Mesopotamia to the British Isles. They were the Bronze Age middlemen dealing in metals and mystery. Their capital, never definitively located, was said to lie near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, where modern-day Seville and Cadiz now sit. A fertile estuary with a natural harbor surrounded by hills rich in ore. And then, silence. Around the 6th century BCE, Tartessos vanishes from the historical record. Not gradually. Abruptly. No written account of conquest, no record of migration, no collapse narrative, just gone. Even Herodotus, writing centuries later, admits the city was once great and then wasn't. Which leads to the question no one wants to ask. What if Tartessos wasn't just forgotten? What if it was erased? Let's talk geography. The Andalusian coastline is an unstable hybrid of river delta, marshland, and shifting sands. The perfect environment for a city to drown slowly, not in a dramatic tsunami, but in quiet entropy. Year by year, the sea creeps in, the land subsides, salt water infiltrates the soil, agriculture collapses, trade dwindles. Sound familiar? It should, because it's eerily close to Plato's description of Atlantis. Circular islands, concentric canals, rich in metals. A naval power located just beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Plato was describing Atlantis around 360 BCE, but many believe he wasn't inventing it whole cloth. He was borrowing from older sources, from half-remembered truths. And in that memory, Tartessos fits like a puzzle piece. Too advanced for its context, Too rich to be real. Too suddenly silent. Let's get speculative. Some fringe researchers and a few serious ones believe Tartessos was not just a local Iberian culture, but the westernmost outpost of a pan-Atlantic network. A maritime civilization with roots stretching across the ocean, from the Azores to the Canary Islands, from Bimini to the Caribbean. A culture that predated classical antiquity and rose from the remnants of an even older world. A pre-flood world. A civilization not rebuilding from scratch but re-establishing lost trade lines, lost knowledge, lost rhythms. And Tartessos? A terminal. A relay point. A memory hub. Which brings us to the artifacts. Few remain. Some tombs. Some inscriptions. And gold. Lots of gold. Not just jewelry but language. The Carambolo treasure, discovered near Seville in the 1950s, is a collection of golden plaques, bracelets, and pectorals, whose craftsmanship suggests not just wealth, but symbolic sophistication. The symbols etched into them? Still undeciphered. Not Phoenician. Not Iberian. Something else. Something older. And the architecture? Gone. But not without whispers. Satellite imagery of the Doñana National Parkance, a marshy estuary, reveals circular depressions consistent with Plato's description of Atlantis, rings of land and water. Researchers have found ancient canal systems buried beneath the mud. Causeways. Foundations. Cities that don't appear in the history books, because they were built before history resumed. And that's the terrifying idea. That Tartessos was Atlantis, or at least its shadow, its echo, a civilization reborn after the flood, built on the bones of one that came before. Not myth, not metaphor, memory. And memory, as we've seen, has layers. Tartessos may not have been the original, but it was a carrier, a vessel, a city that knew too much, lasted too long, and vanished too cleanly. Because maybe it was allowed to vanish. Maybe someone made sure it did. And now? Now it's a name in a dusty text. A ghost on a forgotten map, a signal buried beneath a Spanish marsh. And if we ever decode that signal, if we ever see Tartessos for what it truly was, it won't just rewrite history. It will reveal that history has been rewritten before. Over and over. But the next city on our journey didn't just vanish. It was never supposed to be found. It's not just lost. It's hidden. The Aztecs called it their birthplace. They called it Aztlan. Aztlan? Mesoamerica. There are places that vanish in silence and places that vanish in song. Aztlan is the latter. It echoes across the memory of the Aztecs not as a cautionary tale or a political fiction, but as an origin myth so heavy with detail, so suffused with symbolic geography, that it feels less like mythology and more like an encrypted history. Aztlan was the beginning, not of the world, but of a people. The Mexicate, heart of what we now call the Aztec Empire, trace their lineage back to this mysterious northern land. It was a paradise, an island city, a place of glimmering lakes, white stone, and 7 Cavesta Chicomostok from which 7 tribes emerged. And then they left, wandered, conquered, became gods and kings and legends. But they never forgot. Aztlan was not a moral tale, it was home. And if you think that sounds familiar, an advanced city on an island, abandoned after some great turning point, then yes, you've heard this before. Atlantis, Lemuria, Tartessos, Dwarka. Aztlan fits the mold. But what if it's not just coincidence? What if Aztlan was real? What if it wasn't just a cultural metaphor for Mexica identity, but a cultural memory of a civilization that predated them by millennia? Let's start with what the codices tell us. In the Codex Boturini, Codex Obin, and Codex Azcatitlan, we see depictions of the Mexica migration from Aztlan to the Valley of Mexico. Stylized maps, painted in bold glyphs and vivid inks, show an island city surrounded by water. Birds fly overhead. A mountain pierces the sky. People emerge from caves, carrying banners, musical instruments, and the Kalmakakth serpent-shaped bundle that represented wisdom, law, and continuity. None of this feels accidental. These are the icons of origin. And what's strange is the specificity. Aztlan isn't vague. It's a place, described consistently. An island with temples, an urban layout, a location on the water, and most critically north. All Aztec migration legends agree. Aztlan was north of their eventual homeland, north of Tenochtitlan. Some said it was days away, others, centuries. But all agreed it was lost, or left behind, or sealed. Let's talk geography. Over the centuries, scholars, archaeologists, and speculative historians have tried to locate Aztlan. Theories range from Utah to New Mexico, from northern Mexico to Baja California. Some look to the Four Corners region, others to Lake Chapala. A few fringe researchers even point to the lost coastlines of the Pacific Northwest. But maybe they're all wrong. Maybe the confusion is the point. Because what if Aztlan didn't exist on a map? What if it was an echo? A shadow of a pre-flood civilization remembered not in stone, but in migration? In motion? Let's get symbolic. The 7 caves of Aztlanchicomostokere, said to be the origin points of 7 tribes. Each cave a gateway. Each tribe a lineage. Some scholars have suggested these represent cultural divisions. But others believe something stranger. That the 7 caves represent underground cities. Or better yet, survival bunkers. You heard that right. Aztlan may not have been a city at all. It may have been a refuge. A place of hiding during the cataclysm that shattered the last world. The Aztecs believed we live in the 5th sun, the 5th incarnation of human civilization. Each age before us ended in fire, flood, wind, or earthquake. Each age reset. Each age required survivors. And where would survivors hide? In caves. In subterranean temples. In Aztlan. This theory isn't new. It haunts every indigenous cosmology across the Americas. The Hopi tell of emerging from kivas after the Third World was destroyed. The Maya speak of Zibelbethe underworld that housed the ancestors until it was safe to rise. And the Inca believed their founders emerged from a cave called Tampu Tocoa, direct analog to the 7 caves of Chicomostoc. It's the same story, over and over. A pre-human, pre-flood world. A great forgetting. A re-emergence. And a migration. So maybe Aztlan wasn't just a homeland. Maybe it was the last node in a dying network. A site of preserved knowledge. A fragment of something older, Rama, Lemuria, or some unnamed precursor. Let's talk language. The name Aztlan means place of the herons. But it can also be interpreted as place of whiteness. A land of shining stone. A luminous city. An echo of descriptions we've seen in Atlantis, in Dwarka, in Plato's dream. And who lived there? The Azteca Chichimeca. A hybrid people. Not gods. Not mortals. But transmitters. Messengers. They didn't build Aztlan. They left it. And they carried its symbols forward. The feathered serpent. The obsidian mirror. The triple temple layout. The belief that history moves in cycles. Because maybe Aztlan wasn't a singular place but a cultural hard drive. A vessel. a mythological casing around a real location that once held the DNA of a pre-flood civilization. And that DNA still pulses. In Aztec temples, in Mayan glyphs, in Andean stonemasonry. The same architectural fingerprints, the same celestial alignments, the same serpent iconography. This isn't diffusionism. It's recollection, shared trauma, passed down through ruins and ritual. And Aslan? That was the safe house, the hidden library, the outpost of a memory we're only just starting to remember. Because beneath the stories, beneath the soil, beneath the scripted erasure of colonization, the land still remembers. And the caves still echo. And if we ever find Aslan, if we stand on its island, beneath its herons, above its cave sit, won't just be an archaeological discovery. It'll be a reunion with the parts of ourselves we left behind when the waters rose. And if Aslan was the exit point for a civilization fleeing its own flood, then the next land on our map may have been their destination. A kingdom of trade and myrrh, a partner of Egypt, a place that was always known and never found. The land of Punt. The land of Punt, ancient Egypt. In the annals of Egyptian history, the land of Punt is more than a trading partner. It is a memory. A shimmering mirage at the edge of known geography, a place of incense trees, exotic animals, and gods that walked like men. Egyptians called it Ta-Necher, the land of the god, not land of a god, the god. It was never conquered, never ruled, only visited, and always with reverence. Which raises an unsettling question. What if Punt wasn't a distant kingdom? What if it was a remnant? A preserved fragment of a pre-flood civilization that Egypt itself grew more envied? Let's begin with the evidence. Punt is most famously recorded during the reign of Pharaoh Hatshepsut, around 1470 BCE. Her expedition, known of the first documented voyages in human histories, was immortalized in reliefs at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. These carvings aren't vague. They show ships large, cedarwood ships laden with goods, gold, ivory, ebony, baboons, giraffes, panther skins, and trees. Whole trees uprooted and transported back to Egypt. Frankincense and myrrh, precious and rare, gifted to temples and embalming chambers. But the carvings also show something stranger. Buildings on stilts. Queen Ati of Punt depicted as unusually large, with exaggerated features. Men in odd dress. And a lush, rich land that looked nothing like arid Egypt. This wasn't just commerce. It was pilgrimage. But here's the problem. Despite being recorded multiple times over 1,000 years of Egyptian history, no one knows where Punt was. Let that sink in. One of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world maintained a long-term relationship with a foreign land, sending ships, bringing back goods, even referring to it as sacred, and yet, in modern times, we can't find it. Some scholars say it was in Somalia. Others say Eritrea. Still others claim Yemen. All point vaguely south or east. But none can explain the reverence. None can explain why the Egyptians gave Punt divine status. Unless it was older, much older. Unless it was already ancient when Egypt was born. Let's go deeper. Punt isn't just referenced by Hatshepsut. Mentuhotep III launched expeditions there around 1950 BCE. So did Pharaoh Sahura around 2500 BCE. And every time, the tone is the same. We are not going to trade. We are going to remember. Because in the myth of Osiris, arguably the most important myth in Egyptian religion, there's a moment when Osiris, the god king, travels to a distant sacred land. Some scholars argue that this land of the god was Punt. In other words, Osiris came from Punt. Now add this. In Egyptian cosmology, the cycle of civilization begins with Zep-Tepeth's first time, a mythical golden age when gods walked the earth and taught humanity everything it needed to know. Where did this Zep-Tepi occur? No one knows. But some texts hint that it wasn't in Egypt. It was elsewhere, beneath the horizon, in a land of plenty, a land across the sea. Punt. What if Egypt didn't invent itself? What if it inherited its sacred geometry, its solar alignments, its temple codes? What if all of it came from Punt? And what if Punt didn't just vanish? What if it sank? Because the coastline of the Horn of Africa is one of the most geologically unstable regions in the world. Tectonic rifts, subduction zones, sudden drops in elevation. Entire landmasses could disappear and leave no trace beneath shifting seabeds. Just ask Bimini. Ask Dwarka. Ask Zealandia. Ask Atlantis. What if Punt was a surviving node from a pre-flood global civilization? An outpost that Egypt found and kept secret, traded with it, worshipped it, and when it finally vanished, whether by rising seas, internal collapse, or simply sealing itself off, Egypt recorded only its silence, and kept calling it the land of the god. Let's get granular. The flora and fauna imported from Punt frankincense, myrrh, giraffes, baboons were not native to Egypt. But here's the thing. The trees thrived when replanted in Egyptian soil. They adapted perfectly, which suggests a similar climate, a similar elevation, a shared ecosystem. But where is that ecosystem now? Parts of southern Arabia fit barely. But if you trace back sea levels to the Younger Dryas, a different picture emerges. Large portions of the Red Sea and Arabian Peninsula would have looked drastically different. Islands now submerged, ridges now erased. Could Punt have been one of them? Could it have been a bastion and ark of something far older than Egypt? A place that remembered what Egypt forgot to ask? Because every culture, when asked where it came from, points backward. But Egypt always pointed to Punt. Always south. Always to the sea. And maybe they weren't just pointing to a source of wealth. Maybe they were pointing to origin. A memory so sacred it could only be preserved in ritual. A knowledge so dangerous it could only be traded in incense. And when the last ship returned, when the last queen died, when the last temple was sealed, Egypt turned inward, became a museum of itself. Because Punt was gone. But its blood still ran through Egypt's veins, through its pyramids, its calendars, its stars. And maybe, if we find Punt not the ports, but the core, we'll find more than trade routes. We'll find the next chapter in the story that began with a flood. But before we cross that sea, we need to descend further, into the first storm, the first civilization, the first fall, the biblical world before Noah, the antediluvian earth, the world that was judged and erased. The antediluvian world, biblical. There is a silence in Genesis that feels deliberate. Between the moment Adam is exiled from Eden and the moment Noah boards the ark, the Bible rushes past entire centuries, millennia, even speaking in vague genealogies and whispered hints, as if trying to cover a wound. What little it says is drenched in unease. Long-lived patriarchs, cities built in a single generation, sons of God descending to earth, and giants walking among men. The world before the flood, the antediluvian world, is not described in detail. It's buried, intentionally, casually, as if remembering it too clearly would invite it back. But the fragments that remain? They suggest not a primitive society, but a terrifyingly advanced one. A world not of mud huts and stone spears, but of engineering, empire, and catastrophe. Let's start with Genesis 6. One of the strangest and most densely packed chapters in the Bible, It introduces the Nephilim, the giants, or fallen ones. It tells us that the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Their offspring were described as heroes of old, men of renown. The phrasing here is not accidental. These are not gods, not angels, not demons. These are intermediaries, the result of something ancient and forbidden. And in the very next breath, God decides to destroy the world, not because of disobedience, but because every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. This is not the story of a single act of sin. This is the collapse of civilization. A civilization that, by all accounts, should not have existed at the time. Because the genealogies list lifespans of 700, 800, 900 years. Men who walked with God, men who built cities, invented instruments, and forged tools of bronze and iron. Before the flood, thousands of years before the rise of Sumer or Egypt. So where are their ruins? Where is their debris? Where are their craters? Maybe the flood was not just punishment. Maybe it was cover-up. Let's go to Enoch. The Book of Enoch, once part of the biblical canon in early Christianity and still revered in Ethiopian tradition, gives us a wider lens. It speaks of the Watchers, angels who descended to earth and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, astrology, weaponsmithing, makeup, sorcery, plant lore. Their leader, Azazel, is condemned for teaching mankind how to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates. This is not metaphor. This is a technology transfer. And in Enoch's account, the flood isn't a random act of divine wrath, it's a deliberate act of containment, a failsafe. The earth becomes corrupted not through sin, but through information, through progress, through an acceleration of knowledge that unravels balance. Sound familiar? It should, because the antediluvian world mirrors every myth of every lost civilization, a golden age corrupted, a fall, a deluge. Let's examine the timeline. In Genesis 5, 10 generations pass from Adam to Noah. If taken literally, this places the flood somewhere around 2300 BCE. But the ages are symbolic, and the text itself doesn't care about dates, it cares about distance. The antediluvian world is not prehistory, it is pre-memory. A time so alien that remembering it becomes dangerous. And yet, traces persist. Across the world, flood myths repeat like a broken record. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim builds an ark. In India, Manu is warned by a talking fish. In Mesoamerica, the gods drown humanity in a flood, then reshape them from maize. In Australia, the rainbow serpent sends waters over the land to wash away corruption. In every corner of the earth, the story is the same. A civilization falls, and water rises. The survivors? Always a few, always chosen, always instructed to carry something forward. Which brings us back to Noah. His ark is not a boat, it's a vault, a memory container, a DNA repository, a cultural reset switch. Because the antediluvian world wasn't wiped clean, it was archived. What survives is not just life, but code, the instructions for civilization, compressed into myth, embedded in ritual, scattered across continents. And here's where it gets darker. The Bible says that even after the flood, the Nephilim were still around. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward. How? Why? Because the flood didn't end the story. It started a new version of it. A reboot with fragments of the old world hidden in its matrix. Maybe that's why we find advanced knowledge embedded in early post-flood cultures. The precise mathematics of Egypt, the astronomical alignments of Sumer, the sudden emergence of agriculture and architecture across Eurasia and the Americas. These aren't coincidences, they're echoes. The antediluvian world wasn't erased. It was rebranded. And its architects? Maybe they didn't drown. Maybe they went underground. Or off-world. Or into memory waiting for the next awakening. Because the antediluvian flood is not the last flood. It's the template. A system event. A cyclical crash. And every civilization since has been a pale imitation of the one we lost. The one that built not just towers, but timelines. The one that broke itself with too much power, too much pride, and too much knowledge. And perhaps that's the true lesson. That knowledge is never lost, only buried, only encoded, only waiting. But the antediluvian world didn't just leave myths. It left people, lineages, legacies, and one of them may have survived more than any other. A city built by a man who walked with angels. A city of stars and books and watchers, Enoch's civilization, biblical, apocryphal. In the kaleidoscope of ancient myth and fragmented scripture, there is one figure who moves like a ghost, across every theological threshold too righteous for earth, too human for heaven, too dangerous to forget. Enoch, mentioned only briefly in the canonical texts of Genesis, yet expanded into vast prophetic volumes in the apocryphal Book of Enoch, he is the man who walked with God and was not, for God took him. But what the later texts claim is that he wasn't just taken, he was shown, taken into the heavens, into the deep structure of reality, into the machinery behind the stars. And what he brought back her, what he left behind, may be the last surviving thread of the oldest civilization never acknowledged. Because Enoch's story is not that of a man, it is the story of a society. According to the Book of Enoch, widely read among early Christians, still canon in Ethiopian tradition, and almost surgically excised from the Western Bible, Enoch was a scribe, a watcher of time, a receiver of wisdom from the so-called Watchers, angelic beings who descended to earth to guide, protect, and eventually corrupt humanity. In this narrative, Enoch becomes a mediator between worlds, documenting everything the Watchers reveal, from the structure of the cosmos to the secrets of metallurgy, the motions of stars, and the roots of divination. This was not idle storytelling. This was data retention. Enoch's civilization, if such a term can be used, was built around knowledge, not the trial and error of slow agricultural invention, but the infusion of complete systems. Calendars accurate to fractions of a day, angelic hierarchies mapped in exhaustive detail, sacred geometry, astronomical mechanics, moral codes carved into stone before anyone else even built cities. It wasn't just myth, it was infrastructure, and it was temporary. Because Enoch's writings make it clear, this civilization was living on borrowed time. The Watchers, once guardians, had overstepped. They had bred with human women, producing the Nephilim hybrids of terrifying size and intellect. They taught mankind secrets too heavy to hold. The balance was broken. And the solution was brutal. A flood to wipe the board clean, but not before one last act of preservation. God commands Enoch to write everything down. All his visions, all his knowledge, all the forbidden teachings. He is told to hide these books, to bury them for future generations, for the wise of the end times. What kind of civilization builds not just for its own survival, but for the reboot of the human story? What kind of knowledge is so volatile it has to be encrypted in scripture, sealed in caves, and passed down in whispers? We don't know what Enoch's cities looked like. No ziggurats remain. No ruins bear his name. But his texts describe landscapes of precision. Sacred mountains where stars rise and set with purpose. Gates where angels emerge during specific seasons. Vaults where winds and spirits are stored like data. This wasn't superstition. This was a cosmic operating system, a fusion of science, spirit, and geometry. And if the city that Enoch lived in, if such a city existed, then it was not made for longevity, it was made for transmission. A node in a larger network of pre-flood civilization that stretched across what we now call mythological geography. Eridu, Dwarka, Mu, Atlantis, Shambhala. Each city playing a role. Each city carrying a different piece of the code. But Enoch's piece was unique. It was recursive. It was about the cycle itself, the rise and fall, the moral decay, the flood, the survivors, the watchers, the next rise. Because Enoch didn't just receive prophecy, he became a prophet. And in the most chilling passages of the apocryphal books, he doesn't just describe the past, describes our future. He sees civilizations fall in sequence. He sees towers built to the sky and torn down by fire. He sees the stars disordered, the earth poisoned. He speaks of a generation of iron and clay, one that will have all knowledge and no wisdom, one that will forget the flood, one that will repeat it. And if that's true, if Enoch wasn't just a mythic placeholder but a historical cipher, then his civilization didn't vanish. It hid. In texts mislabeled as religious fanatics' dreams, in measurements embedded into sacred architecture, in astronomical alignments dismissed as coincidence, in oral traditions and underground vaults and dusty scrolls, no one dares translate completely. Because Enoch was not just trying to save his world, he was trying to warn ours. What kind of civilization encodes a warning across 10,000 years? What kind of disaster forces a man to become myth, a city to become allegory, a culture to become scripture? A cataclysm, not of fire or ice, but of forgetting. Enoch's civilization is the ghost of a memory, glimpsed in apocrypha, buried in metaphor, and pulsing through every flood, myth, and golden age echo the world has left behind. And if his books are still hidden, if the cave where he stored them still exists, buried in some unscanned ridge, some unexcavated tomb, some forgotten library in Ethiopia, or the Dead Sea, then they are not just religious texts. They are user manuals for survival, for memory, for the next loop. Because the flood was not the end of the world. It was the firewall. And everything we know are monuments. Our machines, our stories may just be corrupted downloads of what Enoch tried to save. But not all survivors wrote books. Some built cities, some built exiles. And one of them was cursed to walk east of Eden, into a place no one wants to find. The land of Nod. The land of Nod, biblical. It begins with a murder, a single act of violence, raw and intimate, between brothers. Cain kills Abel, and the earth opens its mouth to drink the blood. That moment is the rupture, the first crime, the first fracture in the mythic perfection of early human life. And for that, Cain is not killed, he is marked, banished, doomed to wander. He is sent east of Eden, to the land of Nod. It's one of the most cryptic sentences in Genesis. A sentence so simple, it barely registers. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. That's it. No explanation, no geography, no description of the people already there. But the implications are seismic. Because when Cain arrives in Nod, he doesn't wander alone. He builds a city. He marries. He fathers a child, Enoch not the same as the prophetic scribe of the apocryphal books, and names the city after him. Stop. Think. He builds a city. For whom? The Bible tells us that at this point, only 4 humans exist. Adam, Eve, Cain, and now dead Abel. So who lives in Nod? Who are the people Cain fears when he says, "Anyone who finds me will kill me"? Who is he building a city for? Unless there were already people there. Unless the land of Nod was not a wilderness, not a punishment, but an encounter. A meeting point between the post-Edenic humans and a civilization so old, so forgotten, that even scripture refuses to speak its name. This is the crack in the narrative, the implication that humanity did not begin in a vacuum, that it emerged into a world already inhabited, that the Garden of Eden was not the world's only axis, but one among many, and that east of Eden, in the land of Nod, something else endured, something older, something different. Let's follow the breadcrumbs. Cain builds a city. That means planning, materials, labor, mathematics, and purpose. These are not the actions of a cursed nomad. These are the marks of inheritance, of someone encountering a landscape already shaped by knowledge, perhaps ruins, perhaps survivors, perhaps an older civilization shattered by a flood or something worse and reduced to shadows and echoes. Cain does not create a city from scratch. He claims it, names it, leaves a mark on a place already marked. And that's where things get deeper. Cain's descendants are not primitives. They are innovators. His lineage includes Jubal, the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes, and Tubal-Cain, a forger of all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. These aren't agricultural achievements. They are technological, metallurgy, music theory, craft. Sound familiar? This echoes the apocryphal Watchers, the forbidden knowledge, the antediluvian tech. What if Cain didn't bring civilization to Nod? What if he found it there? Found a land of survivors? Found remnants of a pre-flood city? Found ruins, half buried under sand and silence, and sparked something new? Or, worse, awakened something? Because the mark of Cain isn't just a curse, it's a protection. God says, if anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. Why? Why protect a murderer? Unless Cain's journey wasn't about punishment, but preservation. Unless he carried something dangerous, something necessary, a strain of human memory that had to be kept alive. Even if it meant putting it in exile. The land of Nod, then, becomes more than geography. It becomes a metaphor for all the places history refuses to acknowledge. It is the fringe, the edge, the off-map zone where memory is exiled and civilizations fade into folklore. Every culture has its Nod, the hidden land, the cursed city, the place no one visits and everyone fears. In Sumer, it's Kur. In Egypt, it's Dua. In India, it's Naraka. In Mesoamerica, it's Xibalba. And all of them exist east of something sacred, east of center, east of paradise. And maybe, just maybe, they're all the same place. Or the same idea. A civilization that absorbed the fallen, not just morally fallen, but technologically fallen. Civilizations that knew too much, that burned too bright, that rebuilt too fast, and were told to wait, to wander, to disappear into silence, until they're needed again. Because the land of Nod isn't the end of Cain's story. It's the beginning of a new timeline, a new lineage, a branch of humanity that walks parallel to Adam's bloodline, separate, marked, in possession of tools and songs and iron too early, too advanced, too deliberate. And as the ages passed, and the waters rose, and Babel fell, and the maps were redrawn, Nod may have sunk into the ground, or ascended into myth, or simply became the next world. Because if you keep walking east from Eden through memory, through metaphor, through myth, you reach the place where all the pieces start to reappear, scattered, encoded, waiting. A chain of islands across the Pacific. A cradle that may never have been above water. The kingdom they called Mu. Mu, Lemuria, linked to Pacific island cultures. Mu Lemuria. The names flicker like mirages across maps that don't exist. Any more names whispered in pseudo-historical texts, New Age esoterica, and the crumbling margins of colonial-era anthropology. Most scholars roll their eyes. They classify Mu and Lemuria as discredited theories, the hallucinogenic leftovers of 19th century attempts to explain away evolutionary puzzles. But beneath the myth, beyond the fiction, buried in the stone memories of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia, there is something more. Not proof, perhaps, but pattern. And patterns have power. Let's strip away the noise. Forget the Victorian mystics and theosophical cults who claim that Lemurians were 12-foot-tall ethereal beings with third eyes and translucent skin. Forget the Atlantean crossover fan fiction. Focus on what remains when the fog clears an idea both older and more elemental, that a vast land once existed in the Pacific, a sprawling continent or super-archipelago, now lost beneath the sea. And that land, whatever its name left behind, echoes. Cultural, architectural, linguistic, and spiritual. It didn't vanish. It dissolved into the Pacific bloodstream. Let's start with the stones. Across the Pacific, scattered like fossilized breadcrumbs, are megalithic structures that should not exist. On the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia lies Nan Madol, an artificial complex of over 90 islets built from giant basalt columns, some weighing 50 tons, stacked with astonishing precision. There are no quarries nearby. No iron tools have been found. The oral traditions say the stones were flown in by magic. Magic. Or technology. Or memory of a method lost. Further east, on Easter Island Rapa Nui Way, find the Moai. Massive stone heads with torsos buried beneath soil, aligned along magnetic lines, their backs turned to the ocean, as if guarding something inland or protecting what remains behind them. The indigenous Rapa Nui people tell of an earlier race, the Long Irsu, built the Moai and ruled the island before being overthrown. Legends of collapse, civil war, and forgotten knowledge. And then there's Tonga, with its Ha'amunga Amaui, a trilithon stone gate weighing over 30 tons, or the stepped pyramids of Tahiti, or the ruined platforms of Hawaii, or the still-buried foundations found beneath the waters off Yonaguni, Guam, and even Fiji. This isn't scattered coincidence. It's infrastructure. The scattered skeleton of a civilization that may have once stretched across thousands of miles, across a territory now drowned, fragmented, erased not by forgetfulness, but by flood. Let's talk language. Polynesian languages are tightly clustered. Despite being spoken over a territory that spans a third of the globe, their linguistic drift is surprisingly small. This implies a relatively recent and sudden expansion not well accounted for by mainstream anthropology. And yet, some root words in Pacific tongues have parallels in Dravidian languages of South India and Tamil Nadu places, often linked to Lemurian myths. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe we're looking at the cracked mirror of an older tongue. A global pigeon born from pre-flood survivors, rebuilding an island scattered like punctuation marks across the open ocean. Let's pivot to myth. Nearly every Pacific island culture has flood legends. Hawaiian chants tell of a great deluge sent by the gods to cleanse the earth. Samoan stories speak of islands swallowed by the sea. Maori traditions from New Zealand speak of Hawaii, the ancestral homeland, far across the ocean and island that disappeared beneath the waves. Rapa Nui's legends speak of a once massive land, home to the creators of the Moai, now sunken and gone. Again and again, the same story surfaces. A homeland lost. A catastrophe survived. A dispersal. A rebuilding. Sound familiar? It should. It's the story of Atlantis, of Noah, of Enoch, of Dwarka, of every lost city and civilization we've traced in this narrative. The only difference is the location this time. in the Pacific. And the scale? Unfathomable. Some theorists believe Mu stretched from present-day Easter Island to Indonesia. Others claim it encompassed modern-day Oceania. Some imagine it as a physical continent. Others as a network of cultural superorganisms sustained by trade, ritual, and memory, shattered by rising sea levels and the trauma of forgetting. And the trauma is real. Genetic studies show that many Pacific Islanders carry traces of unknown ancestry ghost lineages that don't match any known continental population. Not Asian, not African, not Native American. Something else. Something older. Something left behind. Let's talk astronomy. Across the Pacific, ancient navigation was not just practical, it was sacred. Polynesian voyagers used stars, ocean swells, bird paths, and bioluminescent plankton to cross thousands of miles of open ocean with no maps, no compasses, no metal. This knowledge was not guessed. It was inherited. From where? From whom? What kind of civilization trains its memory to survive only through song, through skin, through ritual? A civilization that knows writing can be lost, that monuments can sink, that only story can survive the flood. Maybe that's what Mu was. Not a landmass, a memory mass. A civilization not of towers and roads, but of codocultural DNA scattered across islands to act as reboot nodes for the next world. Each island a data packet, each myth a compression algorithm. And if that's true, then the Pacific is not empty. It is a hard drive. And we've barely scratched the surface. Because if more Lemuria did exist, and if its fragments seeded the cultures we now call indigenous, then the world we know is a post-Mu civilization. Built not from the ground up, but from the surface down. And the question is no longer whether it existed. It's how much of it remains. Because the last civilizations in our list may not be drowned or vanished. They may still be visible, still standing, still coded into the mystery of cities that officially exist yet carry in their bones something unexplainable. And the first among them? The cities of the Indus Valley. The Indus Valley Civilization, early, pre-Vedic. In the northwest corner of the Indian subcontinent, between the rugged Himalayas and the scorched Thar Desert, a civilization rose so suddenly and so completely that even its ruins exude a kind of quiet arrogance. It did not build ziggurats to reach the gods. It did not carve giant statues of its rulers. It did not obsess over conquest. It built systems. Silent, perfect, unyielding. This was the Indus Valley Civilization Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Rakhigarhi, Dholavira and, while its ruins have been dated to roughly 2,600, 1,900 BCE, every new discovery forces the line of origin backward, until we're left standing on the lip of prehistory, staring into a mirror that shouldn't exist. Because what we find in the Indus is not a civilization becoming. It's a civilization that already was. From the moment its bricks are uncovered, we see standardization, same size, same ratios, same materials across cities hundreds of miles apart, streets aligned on precise grids, drainage systems more advanced than those in many 19th century European towns, multi-story homes, centralized granaries, reservoirs the size of stadiums, public baths, urban planning with a level of forethought and symmetry that would make modern city councils blush. And then there's the mystery. No monuments, no palaces, no evidence of kings or empires, no great conquests recorded in stone, and no deciphered writing. They had script. Thousands of seals with strange glyphs, elephants, unicorns, geometric patterns, human-animal hybrids, but no Rosetta Stone has been found, no bilingual inscriptions. The language of the Indus remains stubbornly silent, as if refusing to tell its story until we're ready to hear it. Or worse, until we remember it. Because here's where it starts to crack open. The cities of the Indus weren't laid down haphazardly over centuries. They were planned, designed. And that planning includes celestial alignments, environmental optimization, and resilience to flooding and earthquakes. In Mohenjo-Daro alone, the so-called Great Bath is a marvel of hydraulic engineering, complete with advanced water management systems, sealing materials, and architectural proportionality that suggests a philosophical obsession with balance. But who were they? Mainstream history says they were early Bronze Age peoples, part of the same wave of urbanization that hit Mesopotamia and Egypt. But that doesn't explain the anomaly, because the Indus didn't imitate. It didn't follow. It wasn't part of a learning curve. It was a transfer. It arrived too complete, too fast, too different. Let's get deeper. Recent satellite imaging and excavation have revealed that the Indus River was once flanked by an even greater river, the mythical Sarasvati, long thought to be symbolic. Vedic texts describe this river as the lifeblood of an earlier, forgotten culture. And now, under the dry soil of Haryana and Rajasthan, archaeologists are finding massive, ancient settlements along a course that matches the long-lost Sarasvati. These settlements are older than Harappa, older than Mohenjo-Daro. Some push back to 5000 BCE, some perhaps earlier. And the people who lived there? They didn't just survive. They excelled. The pre-Vedic texts, the Rig Veda, the Brahmanas speak of a golden age, of mighty cities built by Asuras and Devas, not as mere myths, but with architectural detail, fortresses with 100 gates, cities in the sky, technologies of light and vibration, Vimanas flying vehicles, weapons that could destroy entire populations with heat and fire. In mainstream academia, these are dismissed as poetic exaggerations. In Vedic cosmology, they are memory. And what if those memories didn't begin in the Vedic period? What if they are cultural fossils, encoded in hymns, preserved in ritual, carried forward from an earlier epoch, an Indus epoch? Because when the Vedic Aryans arrived in the subcontinent, whether by migration, invasion, or assimilation, they didn't find wilderness. They found cities, and instead of destroying them, they absorbed their remnants, their water systems, their astronomical knowledge, their philosophical frameworks. So maybe the Indus Valley didn't collapse. Maybe it transitioned from stone to verse, from architecture to ideology. Its physical cities buried under flood and time, its mental cities reborn in Vedic scripture. And the silence of its script? Maybe that was deliberate. Maybe the knowledge was too volatile to be spoken, too sacred to be explained. So it was encoded in ritual, in alignment, in silence. Because not all memory is vocal. Some is spatial, some is hydraulic, some is sung, and some is waiting beneath 5,000 years of silt, watching us mistake absence for emptiness. The Indus Valley is not just another ancient civilization. It is the final page of a book we don't know how to read. A book written before the flood, before Babel, before the fall, and maybe, just maybe, it holds the final key to all the others. Because if you trace the ruins of the Indus westward, along the dried riverbeds and vanished trade routes, you begin to hear the same rhythms in Sumer, in Egypt, in Dilmun, in Atlantis. Not copies. Echoes.